Chapter 1563. Li Qingshan's heart shuddered. As the possession succeeded step by step, he gradually devoured her memories. The memories were far too shallow. They were not surging torrents but just a few shattered pieces of ice. Every single piece possessed the same dark, deep background, and the same scenes were reflected on them repeatedly. The great sage of Moving Mountain, who stood as majestic as a mountain in the ruins of End, the well-like sky in the Netherism dwelling, and her crying like a homeless child. This scene stabbed him deeply. It was even more painful than enduring the tortures of hell. So, I have forgotten everything. So, I was not a coward. They had all gone through terrifying hardships, only breaking free from their predicament after exhausting everything they had. They were all covered in wounds. Even though he had never lost any of his memories, the tortures of hell and the unforgettable betrayal made him burn with fury and hatred, as well as deep suspicion. If even great sages could betray one another, just what would the end of the Nine Heavens path be like? How could he not be filled with questions? Until this moment, I sank into the boundless sea of consciousness calmly. I could not help but think again, just who am I? Even with the perfect spirit turtle bloodline, allowing me to peer into the heavenly secrets and see through fate, this was the only question that remained unanswered. So I still don't understand. However, it no longer mattered. Li Qingshan had already returned. Suddenly, a voice answered with certainty, "You're Li Qingshan." A huge hand grabbed me firmly and dragged me out of the depths of the sea. On the surface of the sea, the two Li Qingshans looked at one another like they were looking at a mirror. They possessed the same appearance, but they possessed completely different bearings. The world spun. Violence and silence, passion and coldness, repeatedly argued, clashed. As it turns out, my spirit turtle transformation has already reached major success. It can naturally suppress all demonic thoughts. If I hadn't given up on my own, it's basically impossible for me to be possessed. And if it were an open confrontation, he would even understand just how terrifying the three mountains were, even better than me, with all his memories. Did I spare his life? Yes. Strictly speaking, was the original body. He was just a soul. Possessing the body of a fiend god, he had unparalleled potential. If he wanted to turn the tables, this might be his only chance. However, he smiled casually. The next moment, I felt the torrent of memories surging in. The past that she had described was all vivid in his mind. His youth accompanied by bulls, his youth traversing the world, the first meeting with her, the parting with Brother Nyo, everything became extremely clear. It was no longer just a wonderful story but a real life. The emotions contained in it were so strong that they easily broke through the frozen heart and turned it into a turbulent sea. The fiend god transformations that he had to suppress were awakened one by one. The frozen small world in Xiao Chen's body began to revolve once more, and the world rumbled. I finally found my name. I frowned and looked at him with a complicated expression. Why? Even though they had the same memories, it made up for the differences between them. However, due to the fundamental difference between the fiend god body and the Mahasvara primordial spirit, there was still a huge divergence between them. It was impossible for them to merge into one so easily. To me, it was naturally a huge benefit. However, to him, not only was he giving up the victory that was within his reach, but he was also strengthening his opponent. After recovering his memories, he recovered his fighting spirit and arrogance. You are willing to die for her, but I am not willing to live for her. Aren't you afraid that after I go through the sixth tribulation, I will immediately suppress you and refine my primordial spirit? This fragile balance was only because the primordial spirit was one realm higher than the main body. Once their realms were the same, I would have an overwhelming advantage. By then, destroying the primordial spirit that was causing trouble would be the best choice. Your thoughts can't escape my monitoring. He pointed at his head. Monitoring myself? There must be something wrong with his brain. I mocked myself and looked into his eyes. People change. Yeah, people do change. However, in infernal hell, Brother Luer told me, you must believe that we are different from those guys in the sky. Even though he was betrayed, he still persisted. If he didn't even dare to believe in himself, what was the point of the so-called 9 skies? He returned all his memories and didn't keep anything back. He turned and disappeared from the boundless sea of consciousness, returning to the small world. Only me was left. Recalling everything that happened in infernal hell, his expression became determined. I want to believe. I believed that one day I would be able to reach an agreement with him. I believed that day wouldn't be too far away. When I was in a desperate situation again, facing an undefeatable enemy, these small differences wouldn't mean anything. Survival and killing the enemy were the most important. Everyone knew this. Compared to destroying each other, this was the only way to unleash the strongest power. Along the way, the last thing Li Qingshan lacked were dire straits and powerful enemies. He who asked us to choose such a path. I closed my eyes and digested the memories. The world-destroying godly flame disappeared and the terrifying aura that could destroy everything dissipated. The direct disciples looked at each other in fear. Some of them didn't understand what had happened. Only Chao Tianjiao was shocked as though she had seen something unbelievable. Normally, when clones lost control like this, they would either split up, fight it out, or even perish together. However, she had never heard of anyone being able to coexist peacefully in the end. This was the greatest difference between Li Qingshan and regular cultivators. If what he pursued was longevity, then only if he split up could he avoid the danger of death. If what he pursued was benefits, then all he could do was find a way to finish off the other party. Only then could he monopolize everything. The human heart was fickle. Faced with a situation like this, just how many people would be willing to sacrifice themselves, fulfill themselves, and believe in themselves? She sighed with a smile. This bastard really is a monster. Li Qingshan digested all the memories and slowly opened his eyes, breaking free from the spirit turtle transformation. Although he had not retracted his soul, all of the divine and demonic transformations had been revived. As long as he broke through again, he could undergo the sixth heavenly tribulation. Moreover, everything his soul had experienced in infernal hell, all of his comprehensions and thoughts, would become new resources for him. In particular, the trade winds that the great sage of ventilation had given him contained even more precious information. Its value was no less than the three mountains. All of the divine and demonic transformations could benefit from it. The trip to the demon domain was already imminent. It was time for him to take another step forward. However, before that he wanted to see Little N first and tell her, hungry ghost realm Wuxia City. The lonely city towered high in the sky. Chilly winds howled and the dark clouds refused to disperse. Little N was currently frowning in worry. She was in no mood to cultivate. He had returned, but he had forgotten who he was. Even though the city still stood loftily, its foundations had already been shaken, collapsing day by day. She could do nothing about this. What was the point of cultivating? At this moment, a figure descended from above. He spread his arms with a smile. I'm back. She was stunned. She wanted to smile, but she could not hold back her tears. She threw herself into his arms and hugged him tightly. Chapter 1564. A waning moon shone on a lonely city. A good man went on a long journey, experienced the mountains of knives and seas of fire in hell, passed through the endless abyss of the ultimate, and returned home once again. There were thousands of words, but there was no need to pour them out. As long as they looked at each other and smiled, all their longing and pain were comforted. No longer thinking or roaring, he put down the burden on his body and stopped looking up at the sky. To sleep peacefully in her lap on this warm, fine night, and dream a lighter dream. Under the pale moonlight, Little and gently stroked his face and twirled a long string of prayer beads, passing the news of the return of the Demon King to the heavenly kings. Demonic beast path, the great Kuan was struggling to move its long wing-like fins, swimming into the deep sea. Its body was covered with wounds and it had just escaped a hunt. The dragon's roar still echoed in its ears. The sea had always been the territory of the dragon clan. If there was a blacklist of the most unpopular creatures, the great Kuan would definitely be at the top. For her cultivation she could not leave the sea. Therefore most of the time she lived a life of hiding and narrowly escaped death countless times. She did not look as carefree as she seemed. In this natural world where survival of the fittest prevailed, as long as one was not a top hunter, they had to be prepared to become prey. This was the price of freedom, and it was not something the weak could afford. Resting in a large canyon, she received the news and smiled. It's good that you're back. In the depths of the canyon, a pair of cold eyes suddenly lit up. Thousands of tentacles slowly stretched out in the ravine, and without stirring up any water, they enveloped her like a huge net. A new round of hunting had begun. Azura path wind and smoke rolled the flag, and the war drums shook the stars. Luo Ho Xiaoming was in a fierce battle, but the situation was very unfavorable. The army under his command was retreating, and the military aura condensed on his body was rapidly weakening. He could not fight against the Azura sovereign who was protected by the god of war. Azura's cultivation method was never through seclusion, but through endless bloody battles. He became an undefeatable god of war. If he did not challenge the strong, there was no meaning in fighting. Blindly bullying the weak would damage his fighting spirit and he would lose the blessing of heaven. However, challenging the strong was easy to say, but it was simply self-torture. In order to avoid exposing his identity, he couldn't use any of the Rahu clan's power, which was tantamount to fighting against someone stronger than him while shackled. As a result, they were often defeated. It was only because of the providence that they never died in battle. But this good luck came to an end. His current opponent was an Asura battle god, whose realm was equivalent to a man deity or an evil god, but his combat power was enough to crush an ordinary man deity or an evil god. Of course, the other party disdained to attack him directly. At first, they sent people to surrender and wanted to take him in as a general. He was the Asura sovereign who was often defeated but never died, so he was quite famous in this area. Naturally, he was not convinced. The Asura battle god did not waste any more words and sent out the Asura emperor under his command to encircle and suppress him. As his cultivation level recovered, he no longer cared about ordinary Asura sovereigns. After a few rounds of counterattacks, not only were they not exterminated but they also grew stronger. That Asura battle god became even more interested in him. He personally commanded the army to surround and annihilate him. In addition to the dozen or so Asura sovereigns who took turns to challenge him, he was no longer a match for them. Now he was heavily surrounded. This time, even if he had the providence, he might not be able to escape. Even if the Asura battle god did not attack directly, he had the providence that did not lose to him, which was enough to offset his advantage. Either surrender or die in battle, there was no third option. Now that he received this information, it was like he was saved from death. What? He recovered his memory. What? His primordial spirit went through 6 gods' trials. Doesn't that mean he split up? Whatever, let him help me fight. The kings fought on their own. No one's life was smooth sailing. They had to overcome all obstacles for a dream. Primordial spirit left the body. Li Qingshan glanced at his sleeping self, smiled at little Anne and left the hungry ghost realm. He returned to the Shenming cave mansion, entered the Asura realm and looked up at the blood-red sky. War will never change. Once again he set off on his journey towards the faraway battlefield. 8,000 miles away from Wuxia city was a vast forest. There was not a single leaf on the dead trees, and there were piles of white bones under the trees. The forest was deathly silent, and no ghouls dared to approach. And in the deepest part of the forest, there was an inconspicuous tree with an inconspicuous burl protruding from it. Embedded in it was a lustrous white bead that looked like a white eyeball. If one lay prone on it and observed carefully, they would find that it looked like a skull, and it seemed to be laughing strangely. That was little Anne's skull prayer bead. The reason why it was left here was to keep an eye on it. If one were to dive into the white bones and black soil, deep underground, they would see a gloomy and vast underground palace. The aura of death and the aura of Een were stagnant, forming a substantial flocculus. Not to mention this deep underground, even on a clear day one would not be able to see their own fingers. This place was like a tomb or a tomb. The entire hungry ghost realm was made up of tombs like this, where countless failed cultivators and fallen souls were buried. This tomb was called Wuxia Palace, and it was the resting place of Wuxia Ghost Immortal. Taking advantage of this old ghost slumber, Li Qingshan and Little An worked together to take over Wuxia city. The ghost emperors and corpse emperors were either dead or surrendered, and they were almost all captured in one fell swoop. All of them became Little An's resources. Thus, a skull prayer bead had to be placed here to prevent this victim from suddenly waking up. Although this old ghost slept for 100 years and woke for 100 years, and there were still more than 30 years before he woke up, it was better to be safe than sorry. The hungry ghost realm's heavenly mandate was quite hostile to her, a descendant of white bones. Of course they weren't good people either. 30 years later, even if the old ghost didn't come looking for trouble with them, they would still drag this guy out to burn the fire. A black stone coffin hung upside down in the center of the underground palace. Below it was a dark and deep abyss that seemed to lead straight to the underworld. This was a node where the veins of the earth intertwined. If this was a normal world, it would definitely be a famous mountain and great river that was filled with spiritual chi. It was the most suitable place to build a cave abode. However, in this hungry ghost realm, there was no spiritual chi to speak of. There was only Een chi and death chi that constantly surged out from the abyss and seeped into the stone coffin. On this day, a strange rumbling sound came from the abyss. Dismembered corpses rustled down, and the stone coffin shook slightly. Since many years ago, or more accurately, since the day Li Qingshan and Little An conquered Wuxia city, there had been frequent earthquakes here. It seemed to be a natural phenomenon caused by the movement of the earth's crust, and it just happened to happen at this time. Earthquakes were the product of a series of coincidences. Perhaps it was just the shattering of a piece of rock that affected the stress structure of the entire plate, and in the end, it became an earth-shattering earthquake. However, the tremors gradually subsided, and the stone coffin that swayed like a pendulum gradually calmed down and became motionless. This Wuxia underground palace itself was an indestructible formation, so it was not afraid of earthquakes at all. Even if the mountains outside collapsed and the earth cracked, there would not be much movement inside. It would be too laughable if the abode of a ghost immortal were to be destroyed in an earthquake. Wuxia ghost immortal was in a deep sleep, so he naturally would not be awakened by such a small commotion. However, the situation seemed to be a little different this time. The death qi and yin qi gradually weakened, and before long they completely disappeared. The stone coffin suddenly opened up a gap. A pitch-black shadow poked its head out from within. It had no eyes, ears, mouth or nose and was just a black shadow. It was Wuxia ghost immortal. He released a wisp of divine perception and quickly scanned the entire abyss. He discovered that the direction of the earth veins had changed. He was obviously stunned. The earth veins were equivalent to the internal meridians of a world. Unlike the mountains and rivers on the surface, the speed at which they changed was very slow. Because the hungry ghost realm was constantly devouring and expanding, it was slightly faster than the average world, but it would still take at least 1,000,000 years to change. Even if one moved mountains and filled seas or directly changed the terrain, it would still be very difficult to affect the direction of the earth veins. It would require precise calculations. However, the continuous earthquakes had subtly changed the direction of the earth veins, and it just happened to cut off the earth qi of Wuxia Palace. Was it a coincidence? However, he instinctively felt that things were not that simple. As a ghost immortal, he could already understand the laws of nature. Moreover, over the long period of time he could see more and more clearly. Divination was as natural as seeing with his eyes and hearing with his ears. However, this divination was inexplicably easier than any other time. There's a change in Wuxia City. Chapter 1565. In the Azura Path, the mountains were like the sea and the setting sun was like blood. The sky, which was already red, was dyed with blood. The clouds were burning, magnificent and heroic. It was as if there was no day, only dawn and dusk. Dying in battle under the setting sun and resurrecting under the rising sun, only the color of blood remained unchanged. It was a tragedy and heroism that people who lived under the blue sky and white clouds could not understand. Bang bang bang. The earth shook and the mountains trembled. A giant walked forward with heavy steps, carrying a palace the size of a small mountain on his back. The palace stood tall, with a white tower and a golden dome and scattered courtyards and corridors. It was dyed bright red by the sunlight, like a glorious temple. It was also more qualified to be called a temple than most of the temples in the world. Compared to those stone sculptures and clay statues, this was a living Azura battle god. Deep in the courtyard, a middle-aged man was leisurely leaning on a recliner, enjoying the singing and dancing. There was only one female singer. She was draped in a sari and her face was covered with a veil. There was a sharp white horn on her smooth and jade-like forehead. She danced gracefully, like a bird flying in the wind, or a peacock offering its feathers. The song was sad and moving, like silk, faintly discernible and intoxicating, turning the courtyard into a secret realm in the forest. The sound of fighting from the distant battlefield reached here, but it was also diluted by the song, becoming an insignificant foil. The man's eyes were half closed, also intoxicated by the song. A nimble figure suddenly jumped out of the void. It was an Azura emperor who immediately knelt on the ground, cupped his hands and said, "Your Holiness, that brat still refuses to surrender." The murderous aura from the battlefield suddenly broke the silence, but the singer did not stop singing and dancing. Needham reluctantly opened his dark red eyes, as expected of Kinara. Although it's a decadent song, it's hard to let go. Kinara was one of the 8 living beings, known for their singing and dancing skills. They did not belong to the heavenly path, nor did they belong to the Azura path. But they mainly lived in the heavenly path, known as the heavenly music. They were often taken to the Azura path as spoils of war, in the battles between the heavenly path and the Azura path. Their singing was the ultimate enjoyment in the world, and they had the reputation of singing gods. Needham stroked the thick beard on his face and asked the Azura sovereign, "If I give her as a gift, will he surrender?" "Your Eminence, I don't think that kid will surrender even if he dies in battle." The Azura sovereign seemed to have thought of something. There was still lingering fear in his heart, but there was also undisguised admiration in his eyes. "Then it's useless." Needham waved his hand casually, and the woman's head fell to the ground. The headless body was still dancing, and the veiled head was still singing. It was even more mournful and desolate, like a cuckoo weeping blood. For a moment, the Azura sovereign's mind was shaken, and he couldn't control himself. He hurriedly roused his fighting spirit and guarded his battle heart. If one listened to this kind of singing too much, it would definitely wear down one's fighting spirit. Needham twirled the tip of his beard. If you stand up and fight, you might still have a chance of survival. Following her graceful dance steps, Nara gracefully held up her own head and continued to sing to herself. To die for Ninggu, to live without fighting, to be stubborn. Needham shook his head regretfully. I'll go meet that Prince Xiaoming myself. King Xiaoming's army, the central tent. Luo Ho Xiaoming dismissed his subordinates and faced a map alone. He suddenly pricked up his ears. A sharp whistling sound came from afar, and in an instant, it broke through the heavy military formations and stepped into the tent. We finally meet Prince Xiaoming. Needham looked as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. Looking at Luo Ho Xiaoming's back, his eyes were filled with determination and passion. It wasn't that he had a special preference, but that this talent was too rare. Even though he couldn't use the Rahu clan's divine abilities and spells, the talent and strength that Luo Ho Xiaoming displayed was still astonishing. In a head-on battle, he didn't fear any Azura sovereign. When commanding an army, he could fight against a battle god. At the same time, he was proficient in many battle techniques such as assassination and hunting. These were things that flowed in his blood. The war had lasted until now, and all the Azura sovereigns under battle god Needham were completely convinced by him. Needham understood his value better than anyone else. Even battle gods had to fight bloody battles in order to have the chance to become a true Azura king battle god. Other than the heavens, his enemies were other battle gods. If he had such a general behind him when fighting against other battle gods, to help him command the army and gather the spirit of the army, he would have at least a 30% higher chance of winning. This is a gift from Hong Tian. Needham praised Hong Tian in his heart, his eyes even more fervent. Luo Ho Xiaoming turned around. His beard was unshaven and his face was covered in dust, but his eyes were still as bright as stars. In an instant, it gave Needham the illusion that the other party was a battle god that could stand on equal footing with him. Battle god Needham, you can call me Ming, or King Xiaoming. Luo Ho Xiaoming purposely hid the surname Rahu, and the Prince Xiaoming, that Li Qingshan had forcefully given him. He only kept the word Ming, and had his subordinates call him King Xiaoming. When he turned around, he was forced to add the word Xiaoming in front of his name. He couldn't help but feel unhappy. King Xiaoming. How arrogant. Even I don't dare to call myself that. Needham said jokingly. If you didn't call yourself that, I wouldn't have noticed you so quickly. King Xiaoming was a very arrogant title in the Azura path. After Azura had gone through 7 heavenly tribulations and become true gods, they would go to the western Pure Land of ultimate bliss and meet the Buddha at the great thunderclap temple of Mount Spirited. After going through a series of tests, they were qualified to be titled King Xiaoming. The wise were the light of wisdom and the king could control everything. The King Xiaoming appeared angry, protected the Dharma, and scared away evil spirits. He represented the dignity of Buddhism. An Azura sovereign calling himself King Xiaoming was like a young spirit cultivator calling himself a true immortal. It was so arrogant that it bordered on ignorance. How can a sparrow know the ambitions of a great swan? Luo Ho Xiaoming said calmly. He just wanted to take back everything that belonged to him. Yes, Li Qingshan had often bragged to him about this. Good, very good. I admire this about you. Why did the battle gods come? Don't tell me you're going to take action personally? Needham said bluntly, surrender to me. Your position will be just below mine and I'll let you command all the troops. Luo Ho Xiaoming raised his eyebrows slightly, as if he hadn't expected Needham to have such a plan. He had just returned to the Azura path, and his cultivation was already not weak. He really hadn't met anyone who was qualified to make him surrender. Needless to say, as a member of the Rahu God clan, all Azuras were nominally his subjects. Unlike ordinary Azuras, they hadn't experienced so many battles at the bottom level. Needham thought he was tempted and tried to persuade him further. You're still very young. You need more experience and experience. Follow me to conquer everywhere and broaden your horizons. It's only a matter of time before you become a battle god. For ordinary Azura sovereigns, this was indeed the best choice, but for Luo Ho Xiaoming, surrendering would definitely damage his fighting spirit. What he lacked the most was time. His mother could notice this place at any time, and as a Rahu, he would never serve another Azura as his master. He laughed coldly. I don't need you. I can become a battle god too. Needham's expression darkened, instantly becoming ugly and ferocious. No battle god will allow someone like you to rise so easily. Even if I have to personally take action today, I'll make you stay here. You battle gods are really stingy. Luo Ho Xiaoming laughed disdainfully and shook his head. I didn't think of this at first. Forget it, you talk to my boss. Boss? Needham frowned. Could it be that there were already other battle gods behind him? That would be troublesome. He had to end the battle quickly and take him down. Just as he was about to attack, a man suddenly walked out from a dark corner of the tent and patted his chest. That's right, it's me. Needham was shocked. He hadn't noticed when this person had appeared. Luo Ho Xiaoming said, Too slow. You made me say a bunch of nonsense to stall for time. How can you talk to your boss like this? Stop talking nonsense. Can you do it? Luo Ho Xiaoming questioned. The difference between a mere primordial soul and a battle god was not small. Chapter 1566. What did you say? Needham's face gradually became ferocious and livid, like a statue in a gloomy ancient temple. He walked down the altar step by step, and like a falling mountain he pressed down on Li Qingshan. In fact, his figure didn't change at all. What changed was his momentum, soaring into the sky and stirring up the wind and clouds. The sky suddenly darkened and pressed down on the big tent. All the Asuras on the battlefield looked up. The war god was angry. When the war god was angry, there were millions of corpses and rivers of blood. The victory or defeat of this battle was no longer decided by others. Li Qingshan lowered his head slightly, and under his thick eyebrows, a pair of black eyes sparkled. He said with a faint smile, Let's make a deal. You get out now and I will spare your life. How about that? The gloom in Luo Ho Xiaoming's heart was swept away. This was the Li Qingshan in his memory. He couldn't help but laugh loudly. Go boss, bite him to death. You shut up. Li Qingshan glared at him and thought, I want to bite him to death. The Asura war god wasn't comparable to the infernal judge. Although the latter had infiltrated the system because of this, his combat power was really worrying. In essence, he was just a ghost immortal. The war god had fought his way through bloody battles. He had an undying Asura body and extremely terrifying combat power. It took him a lot of effort to sneak attack Judge Liu. Now that it was a head-on confrontation, he really had no advantage at all. So he deliberately provoked Needham and shook his mind, so that he could take advantage of the situation and trigger the inner demon's counterattack. Needham was furious like a volcano that could erupt at any time. The next moment he regained his calmness. You're not Asura. Who are you? This made Li Qingshan recall the frozen dead fire in the iceberg, and he sighed in his heart, what a perfect willpower. Against Judge Liu's moves, I'm afraid there's no use in this sky. Turning his head, Luo Ho Xiaoming said with a solemn face, Xiaoming, let's escape. Luo Ho Xiaoming facepalmed. I don't know this person. Needham laughed. Prince Xiaoming, is this your so-called boss? Li Qingshan said, Wait, where's the Heavenly King? Heavenly King. Needham's pupils constricted as if he was completely infuriated. He said in a low voice, What exactly are you? Human immortal? Ghost immortal? Undead immortal? The Asura path isn't a place for people like you. Since it wasn't easy for you to cultivate to this stage, get out immediately and I'll spare your life. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the sky. Compared to the Wisdom King, the gods of the heavenly Tao could become the heavenly kings, and they were the most hated existences by Asura. All right. Li Qingshan shrugged. Finally, I have one more question. What? Boom. Lightning tore through the sky, and the tent was torn to shreds by the strong wind. A figure flew out with a whoosh, sweeping across the entire battlefield. He crashed through several mountain peaks and sank deep into a cliff. The aura that belonged to the Asura battle god seemed to have been severed by a blade. It was a demon god with 3 heads and 6 arms. His muscles were knotted, and his skin was indigo like it was cast from steel. His entire body was burning with black flames that resonated with the red sky above his head, dyeing the world black and red. Li Qingshan slowly retracted his fist and opened his arms to the sky. He laughed and asked in a hoarse and inhuman voice, Who said I'm not an Asura? The power he had obtained from Chao Tianjiao had not dissipated yet, and it completely exploded at this moment. The vast mandate of heaven descended from the sky and formed the Asura immortal body. He would not lose to any Asura battle god. He was the son of heaven of the Asura path. He closed his eyes and felt the unprecedented majestic power in his body. It was so huge and violent that he could not control it. At this moment, the realm he comprehended in the colorless realm came into play. Wisps of wind poured into his eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and 36,000 pores, blowing through the great freedom primordial spirit. In the blink of an eye, he subdued this violent god power with the four skies meditation, and opened his eyes. "Kid, watch carefully," Luo Ho Xiaoming said seriously. "I'll wait and see." Li Qingshan stepped on the black flames and flew into the sky. He was very unhappy that he had to give up halfway in that battle with himself. Now he could finally continue. The undefeatable Azura battle god? This kind of enemy was interesting. In the broken cliff, Needham nodded slightly. "I see." He was completely unharmed. Only the fist mark on his chest was quickly fading away. He licked his scarlet lips and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was as if he was listening to the song of the Azura girl, but he was even more intoxicated. He bowed elegantly toward Li Qingshan in the sky. "Attacking the weak really hurts my fighting spirit. I had no choice but to do so. Since you are such a strong person, then I have no more worries." "Then you are really worrying too much." Li Qingshan smiled and grabbed a ball of black flames, throwing it casually. Boom. The cliff turned to dust and the smoke rose into the sky. All of the Azuras on the battlefield were stunned. Another Azura battle god? How did this encirclement suddenly turn into a battle between battle gods? Lord Wisdom King, that is. "That is our battle god." Luo Ho Xiaoming ordered. "Pass down my orders, gather the army and fight again." "Yes, sir." The sound of the war drums shook the earth, and the sound of the bugle horn pierced through the clouds. Li Qingshan stared at the billowing smoke, but his eyes were blank. His gaze seemed to pass through the smoke, past the battlefield, and look at a place far away. He clearly saw the existence of the laws. After going through 6 heavenly tribulations, he was no longer an ordinary cultivator. He had reached an unbelievable realm and could truly see the laws of heaven and earth. It was as if he had suddenly gained another sensory organ. Although he could not see color, hear sound, or smell, what he saw, heard, and received was 1,000,000 times more information than before. There was no color in the world but the tremors of light. There was no sound in the world but the ripples of the air. The things that humans could sense were really too narrow, like the blind and deaf. It was too easy for an ordinary person to defeat a blind person. They didn't even need to be stronger than the blind person. It wasn't just a difference in strength. In reality, the difference was much greater. At least a blind person could roughly understand what seeing meant. If he had been with other blind people since he was young, he wouldn't have been able to imagine how the other person could so accurately grasp his every move and always hit his vital parts. It was as magical and terrifying as if he could predict the future. This was the 7th sense in addition to the 6 senses, the so-called last sense in Buddhism. It was also the first time for Li Qingshan to use this ability in battle. Just now, in that instant, he didn't hit Needham with speed or strength, but used the Sky Demon secret technique to disturb his opponent's last sense. Another reason might be that the power of this punch was too dim, not enough to attract his opponent's attention. In his observation until now, his opponent's breath hadn't weakened in the slightest. Coming. At this moment, Needham walked out of the smoke, his body burning with black flames. The speed at which his flesh was regenerating far exceeded the speed at which the black flames were destroying it. He casually extinguished the flames on his body. Chapter 1567. Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan stood in the burning clouds, his face expressionless, but he was very surprised. Even with the power of the apocalyptic fire, he couldn't hurt this guy at all. Needham. Needham put his right hand on his chest and bowed slightly. He also gave his name, the corners of his lips curling up. "You're very surprised. It seems that you haven't been through the 6th heavenly tribulation for long, and you're not even used to hiding your emotions. Fire is like a weapon. Its power doesn't lie in the weapon itself, but in the person using it. And the so-called apocalyptic fire, of course, can only be unleashed by a god. The fire that the heavenly demon master used to burn down Sanlian City isn't this kind of plaything." Li Qingshan's heart trembled. Under the observation of the nameless consciousness, even his thoughts became almost transparent. In an instant, he rewove his thoughts and built a high wall to block prying eyes. At this moment, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest and he vomited a mouthful of blood. Needham stood far away on the horizon, but in his hand was a bloody heart that was still beating. How can you be distracted during a fight? Li Qingshan's body didn't have a trace of injury, but he felt that his chest was empty. That was his heart. When he focused his mind on the inside, he neglected the outside and revealed a flaw. Based on his past experience in fighting with others, this couldn't be considered a flaw at all from such a distance, but he immediately suffered a heavy injury. Needham's hand directly passed through the void and pierced into his chest, taking out his heart and destroying his other organs. Li Qingshan wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. I've learned something. Needham casually crushed the heart, spread his bloody fingers and covered Li Qingshan. I'll remove your organs one by one. How long can you last with this temporary Azura immortal body? Then I'll empty your primordial spirit and you'll die. Li Qingshan interrupted impatiently. What are you trying to say? Run? The further the better. It's best if you can escape from the Azura realm. Come back after you've completely adapted to this realm and learned how to fight. Didn't you say that I must die? If you die by my hands, I'm afraid he would rather die in battle than surrender. Needham looked at the ground again. Under Luo Ho Xiaoming's command, the heavily surrounded Wisdom King's army had already regrouped and started to break out of the encirclement. He personally led the army into battle, and for a moment their momentum was like a rainbow. Facing an enemy 10 times their size, no one could withstand their vanguard. Her eyes were filled with admiration as she said softly, I need him. Li Qingshan's whole body trembled, and he immediately made up his mind. I definitely can't leave classmate Little Ming to this damn gay man. Die. Controlling the flickering black flames, he charged straight at Needham. He raised his 6 arms and balls of flames condensed into spears. So. In an instant, countless streaks of black light pierced through the air, sealing off all of Needham's escape routes. Needham didn't dodge or evade, allowing a spear of black flames to pierce through his chest. He was actually unscathed. Li Qingshan's eyes widened, and he discovered that Needham's figure was fading in and out of existence. He constantly escaped into the void, shuttling back and forth in the black light as if he were taking a leisurely stroll. At a glance, it seemed as if he could ignore all damage. Needham wore a mocking expression. He had basically reacted before Li Qingshan attacked. In the midst of the fierce battle, Li Qingshan's state of mind was exposed again. Clearly he still wasn't used to fighting at this level. Once his attention was divided, he couldn't take care of everything at the same time. In the blink of an eye, Li Qingshan pounced in front of him, his 6 arms wielding 6 spears of black flames as he struck down with all his might. As expected, Needham's figure disappeared again, and the 6 spears all missed. It's fine if you don't attack. Once you do, hey, you're simply full of openings. Needham appeared again, brushing past Li Qingshan, and casually plucked off one of his arms. Blood splattered everywhere. Feeling Li Qingshan's anger and unwillingness, Needham's heart was as sweet as honey. Li Qingshan's head suddenly turned 180 degrees, and the smile on his face was just as strange. It seemed to be a cold smile, but it was mixed with hypocritical anger and unwillingness, like a twisted mask. A vertical eye suddenly opened on his forehead, shooting out an annihilating divine flame as thick as a finger. However, it was many times faster than the black spears, and in the blink of an eye, it arrived behind Needham, who was completely defenseless. Needham couldn't help but be stunned, but he immediately reacted. His figure disappeared again, and the black divine flame disappeared along with it. This time, a long time passed before he appeared again. At the same time, the black divine flame pierced through his chest. There was no escape. In reality, when Needham entered the void, the black divine flame had already penetrated the void. One was chasing and the other was fleeing, and after going through thousands of twists and turns, it finally hit him. Of course, in the eyes of others, it was just a momentary daze. If one's cultivation was slightly weaker, they might not even realize that he had disappeared, and would only think that he had been hit while defenseless. This time the wound didn't heal. Instead, it expanded and spread. Boom, 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 boom. Just now, the black flame spears landed on the ground one after another. Countless plumes of smoke rose into the sky, and for a moment, the battle cries on the battlefield were drowned out. Needham turned his head, his expression ferocious and furious. He knew that he had been tricked. Li Qingshan had deliberately exposed his emotions, and at the end he had faked anger and unwillingness. Taking advantage of the moment when he had relaxed, he had dealt a fatal blow. Has no one ever taught you not to talk so much nonsense when you're fighting with others? Li Qingshan laughed loudly, and extended another arm from where his broken arm had been. At the same time he extended 6 middle fingers. This is to return the favor. How is this possible? Why are you so skilled? Needham looked at the hole in his chest in disbelief. He couldn't accept it. Just now he had been fooled like an idiot, but now he had adapted so quickly to the fighting style of a 6th-level heavenly tribulation. From faking his emotions to deceiving him, to the divine fire's pursuit in the void, and now that he had been seriously injured, it was as if he had become a completely different person. Moreover, he could confirm that Li Qingshan hadn't been deliberately pretending to be stupid at the beginning. Otherwise he would have directly launched a sneak attack in the tent, and he would have definitely suffered even more. The power of this divine fire of annihilation was too terrifying, and it restrained the undying body of Azura more than he had imagined. TSK insignificant tricks. I don't need to escape, and I don't need to escape from the Azura path. I can kill you right now. Li Qingshan withdrew his 6 middle fingers. I still have to thank you for your guidance. You made me understand that knowledge is power. Adapting to the 6th-level heavenly tribulation realm was, of course, something that took a lot of time. However, in the colorless realm, Li Qingshan had already reached an even higher realm. This information was stored in Brother Lu Er's trade wind. As long as his strength was sufficient, he could integrate it at any time. The realm itself wasn't power, but it was the foundation of all power. After the great Einstein discovered the theory of relativity, Oppenheimer discovered that, it turned out that he could also make an atomic bomb and use it as a big bomb. In terms of fighting, Li Qingshan had always been able to understand it without a teacher. He realized that the way he used the divine fire of annihilation in the past was really too clumsy. It was practically like using a nuclear bomb to hit someone. At most, it was a dirty bomb. Most importantly, he realized that the thing on his forehead wasn't just a flamethrower, but really an eye. Thus, he was able to lock onto Needham's movements in the void and see the flaw that existed on his body. It wasn't the so-called flaw of being punched in the face because he didn't defend in time. Instead, it was the flaw at the level of the rules. It was like a stubborn rock with many cracks that were hard to see with the naked eye. It was useless to hack at it with a knife or axe, and at most it would leave some white marks. But as long as he found the crucial crack and struck it lightly with a chisel, the stubborn rock would crack or even shatter. The undying body of Azura was such a stubborn rock. It wasn't perfect and flawless. As long as he found the crucial node, he could seriously damage it or even cause it to collapse instantly. Of course, normal attacks were completely useless. The node would constantly circulate and change according to the flow of energy and the changes in the movement. The divine eye on Li Qingshan's forehead could see these nodes. But just seeing it was far from enough. Those nodes weren't really points, and the actual situation was much more complicated. Not only did he have to find the cracks on the rock, but he also had to follow these cracks and penetrate the entire rock as quickly as possible. During this process, the cracks were constantly changing. Even the slightest mistake would greatly reduce the effect. Under these circumstances, normal magic treasures and spells were useless. No matter how powerful they were, even if they crushed Needham into powder, they couldn't stop the rebirth of the undying body of Azura. But the divine fire of annihilation had this ability. This was its true terror. In theory, it could destroy everything, and there was no limit to its destructive power. Li Qingshan's 6 hands waved outwards as if he were chasing a child away. Run. Run as far as you can, although I won't let you go. Chapter 1568. Sanders. The setting sun gradually set, the sky was getting dark, and the fierce battle on the battlefield was in full swing. The update was so fast. Millions of Azuras spread out across the vast territory, and it was different from the simple frontal charge that Li Qingshan did in the battle in the demonic domain. The Azuras fought fiercely in every valley, on every hill, and on every field. Some were on high hills, holding longbows, and arrows rained down like rain. Some stood at the forefront of the battle formation, armed and ready, and some freely shuttled back and forth on the battlefield, holding short weapons, appearing and disappearing mysteriously. Even if they were covered with dozens of wounds and broken limbs flying everywhere, they were still fighting fiercely. They were not fighting alone, but cooperated with each other at any time, and the army's spirit was unpredictable. They gathered to attack the enemy, scattered to accumulate momentum, and tried their best to create a situation where they were outnumbered. That was not comparable to the war in any world. Even the old soldiers who had been fighting in the demonic domain for many years could not imagine such a battle. It was like 2 highly refined war machines, crazily colliding and violently rubbing against each other. There is no constant momentum in war, and water is impermanent, was reflected to the extreme here, and there was a high degree of reason in the fanaticism. Luo Ho Xiaoming took advantage of Needham's inability to split himself, and dominated the entire battlefield for a time. However, everyone, including him, knew that the key to determining the outcome of the war was not here, but in the sky. He had also been paying attention to the decisive battle in the sky. Even he, who was once a god, could not help but marvel at the speed of Li Qingshan's progress and the talent he showed in the battle. He is simply a born perfect Azura. If he was not born in the human realm, but in the Azura realm, even if he did not meet that person, he would not be much worse than now. Originally, according to common sense, letting a primordial spirit face a war god was simply courting death. Luo Ho Xiaoming still decided to ask him for help, but it was only because of a kind of trust. It was not something boring like feelings or bonds, but the trust of a warrior. In the case of the same realm, Li Qingshan would never be defeated so easily. The multicolored light in the sky dimmed, and the wind blew away all the smoke. In the dark red sky, a bright moon rose up behind Li Qingshan. His black hair draped over his shoulders like the mane of a wild beast. His face was dark and gloomy. His eyes were like burning coals, shining brightly as he gazed over the entire battlefield. Then it condensed on Nidam's body. Only the divine eye on his forehead was tightly shut. He was resting with his eyes closed. Under the gaze of that pair of eyes, Nidam did not dare to make a move. What he was most wary of was that tightly shut divine eye. Seizing the opportunity to catch his breath, he suppressed the world-extinguishing divine fire in his body. The hole in his chest started to heal again. Suddenly, Li Qingshan took a deep breath. The wind whistled and turned into 2 tornadoes that were sucked into his nostrils. There are almost all the books you want to read. It's much more stable than the average website, and it updates faster. It's all text without advertisements. They surged into the new lungs and propped up the chest. His heart recovered and beat like a war drum, sending blood to his whole body. His strength recovered bit by bit until it reached the most perfect state. Suddenly he looked up to the sky and roared, his heart filled with excitement. His long hair danced in the wind, and his aura rose rapidly. It was like a burning fire, like a cloud, and filled the entire sky. His aura swallowed thousands of miles like a tiger. The battlefield fell silent. Regardless of friend or foe, everyone looked up. Come on. The murderous intent filled the sky. It condensed into the shape of a tiger and pounced on Nidam. Nidam sneered slightly, and suddenly the void. Li Qingshan focused his eyes and rushed forward. In the void behind him, a hand suddenly stretched out, bringing with it layers of afterimages. If Li Qingshan had not reacted quickly, his heart would have been taken away again. Humph, the same trick can't be used on me twice. He turned around, raised the fire, condensed the weapon, and swung the blade, all in one go. 6 blades of divine fire as black as ink slashed at that hand at the same time, but only a series of afterimages were cut. Is that so? It's the same for me. Nidam walked out of the void, dragging with him layers of afterimages. He went against common sense and suddenly moved forward and retreated, left and right, making it impossible for people to grasp his trajectory. He seemed to be strolling, but he was faster than Li Qingshan. Inch by inch, step by step, he approached Li Qingshan. The two of them, one advancing and one retreating, swept across the battlefield like 2 meteors connected head to tail, and fell towards a large swamp in the distance. Nidam's hands did not seem to be connected to his arms. They bloomed like lotuses, fluttered like butterflies, and swayed away the net of blades woven by the 6 blades of divine fire. Clanging sounds rang out and the black flames splashed, but they could not touch him at all. Li Qingshan knew that the difference between their physiques was too big. If they fought in close combat, he had no chance of winning. He would be skinned and torn to pieces by those hands in an instant. Your divine eye, after using it once, needs a long time to recover. You've already used it once just now. If the second time still can't decide the outcome, Nidam looked like he had victory in his hands. Suddenly he crushed a blade of divine fire, and conveniently removed one of Li Qingshan's arms. Boom! The meteor fell into the large swamp. Before the ripples spread out, it was already close to the bottom of the lake, and there was no way to retreat. Shut up, you're not a fucking saint. Li Qingshan shouted angrily, Divine Eye, open. The world suddenly lost its color, shape, and even quality. It was as if he had returned to the colorless world. All he could see was the wrong laws of heaven and earth. What was constantly approaching in front of him was not an Azura battle god, but a highly condensed and rapidly rotating collection of laws. The so-called cultivators, the so-called gods, were never a special group of people who had jumped out of the 3 realms and not in the 5 elements. They were part of the laws of heaven and earth. Whether it was power or life, they all came from this world. The most important thing was that this kind of law itself was also an illusion. The great Tao was invisible. In order for the cultivators to recognize it and the gods to distinguish it, they named it the 3000 Great Tao. All these titles, all names, and all laws were just a bridge to get close to the Great Tao. Therefore all laws are empty. Li Qingshan sat cross-legged. His 6 arms stretched out to form different seals, and his long hair was tied into a bun behind his head. His eyes reflected the tranquil moonlight and the light of waves, as if he was enlightened before his death. He was full of tenderness to the world, showing the gentle appearance. That was one of the most important 6 Dharma forms in the Mahasvara. It symbolized sacrifice, and was also known as the demonic disintegration. Before Nidam's hands touched his body, the Asura immortal body turned into ashes, leaving only the vertical eye. He placed all his power and all his hope on this divine eye. In an instant, all the afterimages on Nidam's body disappeared. He couldn't help but look up in shock. Although he didn't understand what the Saint Seiya that Li Qingshan mentioned was, the threat he felt was much greater than the last time. It was as if he fell into an ice cave, as if he was trapped in a land of death. It could actually directly interfere with his movement and eliminate his afterimages with the observation of the doomsday consciousness. Damn it, with this kind of growth speed, what kind of monster did I meet? Destroy, Li Qingshan said in his mind. Then a black gaze was cast toward Nidam. He quickly retreated, and that gaze stared at him. He escaped into the void, but that gaze was still staring at him. As a battle god, he was helpless like a mortal who couldn't escape the gaze of others. That black gaze had already seen through everything. This time what was left was definitely not just an empty hole. This move is indeed terrifying. It's worthy of being the divine fire of annihilation that burned down Sanlian city. Nidam sighed. Suddenly, he put on a small and exquisite round arm shield and waved his arm in front of him. Crack. A crack appeared on the mirror-like arm shield. Boom. Before the great swamp could create a ripple, it was instantly evaporated by the divine fire of annihilation. At the bottom of the dry lake, Nidam was unscathed. He looked at Li Qingshan mockingly. It's over. Asura didn't use treasures. They used the most basic weapons and armors, which were the so-called Asura divine weapons. They might not have as many magical functions as treasures. The power often depended on the user. Not only could it not turn a weak person into a strong person instantly, it would often devour the owner. But no one could doubt the destructive power and defensive power of these divine weapons. The small shield in Nidam's hand was the real Asura divine weapon, the weapon of God. As for the annihilation divine flame, it was aimed at Nidam's weak point. Since it was blocked by this divine shield, it didn't have the power to annihilate everything. Li Qingshan was stunned. Damn you, this is too shameless. He couldn't win, so he took the weapon. The divine weapons of Asura are a part of Asura. As Nidam said, he put on a light armor and took out a fist sword. He was fully armed. Li Qingshan didn't need to look to know that this sword and armor were the most powerful divine weapons. And not only was he empty-handed, but he also sacrificed the Asura immortal body and exhausted the power of his primordial spirit. No matter how powerful the divine fire of annihilation was, it was impossible for it to go through the shield and armor to attack Nidam's body. And with a light wave of the fist sword, his primordial spirit was about to be cut in half. Li Qingshan thought, let's talk nicely. Want to escape? It's too late. Otherwise, when we meet again, the one who dies will be me. Nidam was really a little scared by Li Qingshan's abnormal growth speed. That divine fire of annihilation made him feel a lingering fear. If he was hit by that attack just now, the Asura immortal body would probably collapse in an instant. And if Li Qingshan's sight was more accurate and stronger, it might even make him unable to be reborn and completely fall. If I don't get rid of this disaster, I won't be at ease. I hope you won't be reborn. Otherwise, I will have to hunt you down until you die. He waved his fist sword and slashed down fiercely. There were many afterimages, and it was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. But it blocked all the way up, down, left, right, and all directions. At this time, Li Qingshan didn't choose to escape. Instead, he took out a wine bag from somewhere and drank a mouthful of wine. Then he took out an ancient bronze sword from somewhere. With a clang, he unsheathed the sword. The two swords clashed, the sword broke. Nidam's eyes widened and his mouth opened wide. He instinctively waved his shield to block. The shield broke. Nidam's expression was like a dream. He looked at the inconspicuous ancient bronze sword falling on his body in a trance. The armor cracked. Li Qingshan's expression was also extremely exaggerated and weird. Just now he just remembered that he also had a weapon. Although his swordsmanship was a little rusty, he could still deal with it at the critical moment. Who would have thought that this thing could cut through the Azura divine weapon like it was cutting tofu? Blood splattered and Nidam knelt down. His throat made a gurgling sound and blood gushed up. His life was already cut off. The destructive power of that sword far exceeded the recovery power of the Azura immortal body. Moreover, it wasn't like the divine fire of annihilation that destroyed the key points. It was purely crushing the enemy head-on. What sword is this? Li Qingshan shrugged his shoulders. Who knows? He sighed again. Saddam, oh Saddam, I told you long ago, don't talk nonsense, don't talk nonsense. Why didn't you listen? You're already called such an unlucky name. Nidam wanted to say that his name was not Saddam, but he spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. He died with his eyes wide open. Chapter 1569. Li Qingshan was also stunned for a while, then raised his sword high and praised, "Good sword." The moonlight was clear and the sky was clear. He turned the blade slightly, but the ancient sword still didn't show any sharpness. There was nothing special about it, but it cut 3 divine weapons and killed a battle god. Hey, which great god is that man in the bear skin? Is he Brother Nyo's old friend? He prayed to the sky, "Thank you for your blessing, great Chief Xiong. Li Qingshan will repay you in the future. At worst, I won't take your position as chief." Then he pounced on Nidam's corpse and stood up shakily. This was a real corpse of a god. Although he couldn't completely fuse with it, he didn't want to start anew. The key was that demon god's body, and this was just for temporary use. Touching the sword wound on his chest, he felt that the sword was even more terrifying. He soared into the sky, swept across the night sky and arrived at the battlefield. He shouted, "Prince Xiaoming, your boss has been defeated, surrender." At the same time he sent a message to Luoho Xiaoming, "Your boss, I won." Luoho Xiaoming was shocked at first. He thought that Li Qingshan could fight Nidam to a draw, or at most force him to retreat, which was already his limit. He didn't expect that he would really kill him on the spot. How did he do it? He heaved a sigh of relief and said, "All right, you win." Later he would definitely get to the bottom of how many tricks this brat was hiding. Li Qingshan smiled, "Follow me and you won't be disappointed." Yes. Luoho Xiaoming smiled, admiring Li Qingshan's meticulousness. There were a few battle gods in the Azura path. If any outsider could defeat Nidam, it would be eye-catching. If he received the attention of a true god, his bloodline and power would be easily exposed. It seemed very natural for Li Qingshan to substitute for him like this. Wasn't it natural for the Azura battle god to kill a ghost immortal from outside? The only problem was that Nidam would eventually be reborn, and it was inevitable that he would be exposed one day. But now, with every bit of time that was bought, Luoho Xiaoming would be able to recover a bit of his strength, which would give him more room to maneuver. Thereupon the 2 armies stopped fighting and regrouped. This kind of thing could not be more normal in the Azura path. As long as they did not lose their fighting spirit, they would always be able to revive, and there was no deep hatred between them. As for the experts who were originally enemies, they instead appreciated and admired each other. The one who received the most attention was undoubtedly the Wisdom King. A few Azura sovereigns immediately came over to chat with him, expressing their desire to spar and learn from each other. Luoho Xiaoming nodded slightly. He didn't say much and just casually said a few words. Even though he couldn't reveal the power of the Rahu god race, he still had a special aura about him. It made the Azura sovereigns who received his response feel inexplicably overwhelmed by the unexpected favor. Seeing that the time was right, Li Qingshan carried out Nidam's last wish, and immediately announced that Luoho Xiaoming would take the second seat and replace him as the commander of the entire army. Luoho Xiaoming sincerely thanked him. Every battle god had his own sphere of influence, which covered countless mountains, rivers and lakes, and was abnormally vast. He finally had enough space to expand and no one could suppress him anymore. That was the opportunity for him to go through 6 heavenly tribulations and become a battle god. Li Qingshan was afraid that his identity would be exposed, so he didn't dare to interact too much with Nidam's subordinates. He directly announced that a celebration would be hosted by Luoho Xiaoming. Relying on some of the remaining memories in this body, he came to the palace on the back of the giant. Deep in the courtyard, Kinara girl, who was in a different place, was still singing sorrowfully. Her voice was weak and ethereal, like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. Li Qingshan glanced at her. What a waste. He grabbed her body with one hand and the head with the other, putting the two together. Then Kinara girl's singing stopped, and her neck was connected again. She couldn't help but widen her eyes and take a deep breath. She looked Li Qingshan up and down with her beautiful eyes and suddenly said, "You're not Needham." Shocked, Li Qingshan slapped his thigh. So he's not Saddam. No wonder he had that expression when he died, as if he wanted to say something. He simply took off the god's body and hooked Kinara girl's sharp chin. "Beauty, your voice is so beautiful. Tell me more." Kinara girl said, "You're not Azura either." Li Qingshan was really a little curious. "How did you know?" In the eyes of Azura, there wouldn't be so much joy. Li Qingshan laughed heartily. "You're right. This was probably the reason why he didn't want to become Azura. In addition to fighting and killing, there were many other things in life, such as good wine and beautiful women. Looks like you're not Azura either." He looked at her slender and graceful figure under the green gauze, her skin as smooth as milk, and her jade-black eyes with almost no white. In short, there was a faint sadness in them. That wasn't an expression an Azura girl should have. "I'm Princess Qin of the Kinara clan. Thank you for saving my life. If you can send me back to the heavenly law, I'll definitely thank you." "Kinara? The 8. Li Qingshan lay down comfortably on the reclining chair. He was getting tipsy and he pulled Princess Qin into his arms. "Then I won't stand on ceremony." Very soon, a soul-stirring mellow moan rang out in the courtyard. At the same time in the hungry ghost realm. After performing the most meticulous divination, Flowerless Ghost Immortal transformed into a black shadow and silently traveled through the depths of the earth, heading toward Flowerless City, which was thousands of kilometers away. He purposely didn't go out from the main entrance. Although he didn't find the skull prayer beads, the skull prayer beads didn't find him either. This was the caution he had developed over the years, and he sensed that something was amiss. The hungry ghost realm was different from the other Daos. There were no true immortals or true gods, and ghost immortals were the strongest. He was infamous in the hungry ghost realm, and he could be considered an expert even among ghost immortals. Unless it was the Hell Realm Zine commander, no one else had any reason to provoke him. Even if he was here for revenge, there was no meaning in destroying Wuxia City. Instead, it would expose his hostility. Thus, he kept a low profile and would rather slow down and retract all of his aura. Very soon, he arrived at Wuxia City and carefully observed for a while before sneaking in. He had gone through 6 heavenly tribulations, understood the laws of heaven and earth, and created the undying consciousness. Even though he was only a ghost immortal, he possessed incredible power. The so-called formation was essentially a fortress constructed by imitating the laws of heaven and earth. In his eyes, it was a fence full of holes, and this was his city in the first place, so he could easily and silently sneak in. Li Qingshan and Little N were completely unaware that a powerful enemy was approaching. Not only was the heavens not on their side, but they were also blinded by their senses. Even if it was a life-threatening danger, they wouldn't have any premonition. Coincidentally, their primordial spirits were heading toward the Azura realm. Not only was there a major realm between them, but this realm was also the dividing line between cultivators and immortals. They didn't have the right time, the right place, and the right people, and they were being ambushed. Chapter 1570. The tranquil moonlight shone on the bed. Little N sensed something and looked out of the window. A crescent moon passed through the dark clouds, flickering between brightness and darkness. Suddenly, a gust of chilly wind surged in, blowing up the heavy curtains and pressing toward her. Ding 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 ding. The chaotic soul bell rang urgently, but it seemed very dull. Unknowingly, endless darkness had drowned the tower like black water. She could not even see her fingers in front of her, and the stars and moon were devoid of light. Little Ann's eyes flickered. She waved her long sleeves, and the skull prayer beads on her wrists scattered and flew away. At the same time, she pulled out the Buddha-slaying sword. However, the prayer beads fell into the darkness like a stone sinking into the ocean, and there was no reaction at all. She was expressionless, and without any hesitation, she swung her sword at the darkness. Just as the blade was raised, it was tightly gripped by the darkness, and it gripped her tightly as well. The darkness devoured her flesh and blood crazily, and in the blink of an eye, her beauty withered, revealing a white skeleton with pale flames burning in its eye sockets. White bone heir. The ghost immortal Wu Hua's surprised voice came from the darkness, and he laughed. No wonder I woke up, the heavens are really helping me. The white bone bodhisattva had caused too much damage to the hungry ghost realm in the past. In order to resist it, even the laws of heaven and earth had been distorted. Even the heavenly will, which had no memory, had left a clear mark that could not be forgotten even now. The laws of heaven and earth strongly rejected the white bone path of great beauty. If he could obey the will of heaven and get rid of a white bone heir, he would definitely be favored by the heavens. Not only would he become the strongest ghost immortal in the hungry ghost realm, but he would also have the chance to take the most impossible step and pass the 7 heavenly tribulations to become a true immortal, completely leaving this damned place. Everything happened in a flash. The darkness seeped into the white bone path like ink, spreading rapidly, and did not let go of Li Qingshan, who was in her arms. He woke up from his dream with a start, and before he could figure out what had happened, he could only feel the terrible omen of death. He could not care less and immediately grabbed the mountain-shifting token and pointed it at the darkness. With a loud bang, a circle of light bloomed, and the tower suddenly exploded. The darkness was pushed back and a vague figure appeared. Li Qingshan soared into the air from the rubble and dust with Shaoan in his arms, but the danger was not over. Wu Hua Ghost Immortal had placed all of his attention on the legendary White Bone successor, so he did not take Li Qingshan seriously. He could easily suck a small fry who had not even undergone 6 heavenly tribulations into a dried corpse. However, he did not expect that Li Qingshan would have a magic treasure that could strike his Yuan Shen. At first glance, he could tell that it was no ordinary item. What a bountiful harvest this time. Diske, all of you can't escape, stay here for me. Just as Flowerless Ghost Immortal was about to take them down, a darkness shrouded him. He raised his head in surprise and saw a mountain flying towards him. At this juncture of life and death, Li Qingshan expressed that he did not want to speak and threw a mountain at Flowerless Ghost Immortal. The mountain was named Yellow Cliff Peak and it belonged to the great saint of moving mountains, Lion Camel King. Under normal circumstances, Flowerless Ghost Immortal would be able to split apart such a huge mountain with a single wave of his hand. Or he could use an escape technique to fly 1,000 miles away. He could even dive into the ground. However, this mountain was unusual. Before it even landed on him, he was already suffocated. He also had the last consciousness and could already see the laws of heaven and earth. At this moment, he was shocked to find that there were extremely powerful laws condensed in the mountain. They were like shackles that pressed down on him from all directions and even from the depths of the void. Khanate Spirit Treasure? Flowerless Ghost Immortal couldn't believe it. It was impossible. How could a mere cultivator, not even a mortal deity, control such a thing? The so-called Khanate did not refer to something that was born before heaven and earth. It was not some special artifact created by Hongjun Patriarch for later generations to show off. The Khanate referred to the true body of the universe, the origin of all things, which was also the 3,000 Great Tao. The I Chien had a saying, "A man is in harmony with heaven and earth, in harmony with the sun and the moon, in harmony with the 4 seasons, and in harmony with the gods and ghosts." The Khanate goes against the heaven, and the posterity follows the heaven. The mountain-moving sage was such a man. He had reached the supreme realm of void refinement and Tao integration. Every mountain on his back was an extension of the great Tao and was a Khanate spirit treasure. For a posterity Dharma treasure to unleash its power, it had to follow the heaven. The more it followed the laws of heaven and earth, the more powerful it would be. The most powerful heaven-grade Dharma treasure could burn the sky and boil the sea. However, Khanate spirit treasures didn't need to do so. They were a part of the laws of heaven and earth, so they could naturally do whatever they wanted. There was no need for them to unleash their power. As long as they could achieve their goal, it would be a waste of energy to create a scene. At this moment, it was as if the mountain-moving sage had personally attacked, even if he only moved his pinky. Flowerless Ghost Immortal couldn't resist at all. A black shadow twisted and shrank as if it was desperately struggling to escape. However, it couldn't walk out of the range of the mountain and was still directly below. For a Ghost Immortal, the mountain didn't fall very quickly. He tried to break the mountain from the bottom up, but the result was like an ant trying to shake a tree, a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Looking at the mountain pressing down on him, his heart was filled with despair. He was unwilling to let his life's cultivation turn to dust just like that. No. Boom. Flowerless City disappeared and was replaced by a cliff. Li Qingshan swallowed his saliva. What the hell? It should be Flowerless Ghost Immortal. He died just like that. Li Qingshan still couldn't believe it. He had been forced into a desperate situation just a moment ago, but in the next moment, he had destroyed the enemy. Seems like it. Little and also couldn't believe it. Suddenly, she sensed that the skull prayer beads had been collected by Flowerless Ghost Immortal. At this moment, it was also pressed under the mountain, completely unscathed. Only Flowerless Ghost Immortal had been crushed into pieces. He couldn't be more dead. She hurriedly activated the skull prayer beads, turning them into skeleton demons. They cackled as they captured the pieces of flowerless ghost immortal. That was a great supplement for her. She had never eaten a ghost immortal before. Li Qingshan looked at the mountain and vaguely saw the figure of the mountain-moving sage. He was smiling at him as if he was asking, "Old 8, are you satisfied with the results?" He blinked again. The mountain was still the same mountain, but the laws condensed within it had dissipated, assimilated by the hungry ghost realm's laws of heaven and earth, turning it into an ordinary mountain. However, he believed that what he was seeing just now was not an illusion. This mountain-moving medallion contained the spirit of the foolish old man, which was why it could lock onto flowerless ghost immortal. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to do anything to flowerless ghost immortal with his own strength. This was the difference between their cultivation realms. In reality, this mountain-moving medallion was not so much a connate numinous treasure to him, but a call for help. He just needed to press the call button, and the mountain-moving sage would descend from the sky and crush the enemy with a finger. Li Qingshan smiled and shook his head. He said, "Thank you, fifth brother. I'll definitely find second sister as soon as possible and pull you out of the sinkhole." He felt a sense of urgency. 3 mountains, 3 chances, and now there were only 2 left. He had originally planned on leaving them to Cheongqi, but indeed, plans could not keep up with the changes. The path ahead was becoming more and more dangerous. He had to transcend the 6th heavenly tribulation as soon as possible and completely fuse with his essence soul. Only then would he have the strength to fight. Chapter 1571. Only when Li Qingshan asked Shaoan did he learn that his soul had run off to the Azura realm. He could not help but sigh. That bastard of mine is having fun in the Azura realm. I'm afraid he won't be back for a while. He was not worried that he would be killed. Instead, he felt melancholy and regretful. He should have had a share of that happiness. The joy of killing flowerless ghost immortal Wu Hua should also belong to himself, and this double joy would bring even more joy, whatever they would reunite in the future. What was mine would be his, and what was his would be mine. There was no need to be so clear about it. At this moment, Little and helped Wu Hua ghost immortal collect his corpse. He collected the primordial spirit fragments and a large pile of artifacts. They then went to the cave abode and investigated it carefully. Only then did they understand what had happened. So the earth veins shifted. That's why the old ghost suddenly woke up. Heaven's will, oh heaven's will. Li Qingshan sighed with a smile. It seemed that they had won against fate again. But this is good. This place is safer than Wu Hua City. No one would barge into a ghost immortal's cave abode. Fortune and misfortune were closely related to fortune. The key was still in oneself. If one was not strong enough, good things could become bad things. If man could overcome nature and go through trials and tribulations, bad things could become good things. After resolving this crisis, the hungry ghost realm's heavens would not be able to accumulate enough coincidences in a short period of time. This period of time was very important. Now that Qingshan had returned, she no longer had any worries. She also had a portion of resources. If she digested it well, she would definitely be able to survive the 6th heavenly tribulation. By then, the hungry ghost realm would no longer be a threat to her. Even if the heavens will arrange for more ghost immortals and corpse immortals to come to her, there was nothing to be afraid of. She pursed her lips. She could even make use of this to wait for rabbits to come to her and eat them on sight. In Li Qingshan's words, it was like food delivery. Time waited for no man. Li Qingshan parted ways with Little An and returned to the human realm. In the Shenming cave abode, he began a new round of secluded cultivation. Time flew. But Sun Yu. With a phoenix cry, she rushed out of the abyss and into the clouds. His voice was like the tearing of silk, resounding through the layers of clouds without end. Phoenix transformation had reached a higher level. In an instant, the small world in his body broke through its bottleneck, and a new balance was established amidst its circulation and expansion. Li Qingshan stood on the surface of the water. The pitch-black surface of the water reflected his glorious wings, proudly spread out as he quietly waited for the heavenly tribulation to descend. The sky suddenly darkened. The wind was like the tide, the dark clouds were like the sea, and the abyss was howling. Monstrous waves rose and fell continuously, as if the entire sea was churning. A wave the size of a small mountain surged into the sky and fiercely slammed into the cliff. Boom! Raging waves beat against the shore, rocks flew everywhere and cliffs cracked. Li Qingshan looked up, and suddenly he could feel the feeling of watching flowerless ghost immortal being crushed to death by a mountain. The dark clouds became thicker and thicker, pressing down on the mountain peak as if the sky was covering it. This heavy and deep nether cave abode was like a small boat in a storm, swaying in the wind and rain. Cracks crawled all over the cliff, and large pieces of the cliff fell into the sea, stirring up even more turbulent waves. The nether grand formation was still operating, supporting the entire cave abode, but in the face of this mighty heavenly might, it seemed so fragile. The core of the formation suddenly flickered a few times and rapidly dimmed. The sound of raging winds, torrential rain, raging waves, and shattering mountains surged in from all directions. The only thing that had not been heard was the sound of thunder. Therefore this rumbling world seemed terrifyingly silent. This was no ordinary sixth heavenly tribulation. How could a mere human resist such heavenly might? Can I? Li Qingshan asked himself. From the perspective of a spirit turtle, his accumulation was far from enough. His cultivation had risen too quickly, and it was inevitable that his foundation would be unstable. Furthermore, it was easy to incur the jealousy of the heavens, and it was destined that the heavens would triumph over man. Crash. Corpses fell like rain in the cave abode. Crack. A huge stalagmite broke off and smashed towards Li Qingshan. With a boom it fell into the water and the huge waves surged. Li Qingshan's figure was nowhere to be seen. No matter how many things are, they are always urgent. Li Qingshan chanted proudly, stepping on the waves. Heaven and earth turn, time presses on. His demonic aura surged into the sky, stirring up the wind and clouds, contending with the heavens. 10,000 years is too long, I can only seize the moment. Lightning flashed and the world became as bright as day, illuminating the entire abyss. Boom. An extremely deep rumble. Rather than calling it thunder, it was more like the sound of a drum. With the thunder as the drumstick and the heavens as the drum's surface, he struck out with all sorts of attacks. The mountain abyss that was struggling to hold on instantly collapsed, as if it was collapsing from the inside. It swallowed Li Qingshan and he fell into the abyss. Li Qingshan's organs were about to rupture, and his bones were about to shatter. Blood surged through his throat, dyeing his lips red. He had never faced such a terrifying heavenly might. It was like swatting a fly, and the sad thing was that he was that pitiful fly. Listening to the heavenly wrath, he licked his lips and his blood boiled. He unfurled his wings to the extreme, clenched his fists tightly, and punched out a rising dragon. A person broke through millions of tons of earth and rocks, overlooking the sea and facing the heavens. The boundless waves and mountain ranges were like giant hands, as if they wanted to pull him down into the bottomless abyss, and also as if they wanted to lift him up high. The four seas churn, the clouds rage, the 5 continents tremble, the wind and thunder surge. He grinned and opened his arms towards the sky. Come. So what if it's a fly? So what if it's an ant? This is the life I want, this is me, Li Qingshan. The sky full of wind and thunder pounced towards him. They converged into a giant lightning axe in midair and it chopped down. There was not even a single ordinary bolt of lightning that descended. The first attack was tribulation lightning condensed into a weapon. The oppressive air, the terrifying might, and the formless laws tightly bound him from all directions. It was airtight and it was like he was suffocating. He did not care and only punched out. Bang! The void shook and countless cracks appeared, shaking off the lightning axe. At this time, a huge black shadow appeared in the deep sea, and it was unknown how long it was, and it emitted a nauseating stench. Li Qingshan focused his eyes and saw that it was a floating corpse. It looked like it had been soaked in water for too long, and it looked like a giant. Its pale skin was covered with veins, and its stomach was bulging like it was about to explode. Looking closely, although the face of the floating corpse was blurry, it looked somewhat similar to Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan's heart trembled and great terror surged. That was his death. It was not even tragic and it was just ugly to the point of being disgusting. At this time, tribulation lightning condensed into a weapon. Sabers, spears, swords, halberds, axes, hooks, tridents. 18 types of weapons, all of them hanging under the sky, pointed at him. He felt like he was in a nightmare and he just stared blankly at the floating corpse. Suddenly, the floating corpse roared and stood up. Its body was unbelievably light and it pounced on him. His body swelled up and his life force rapidly flowed away. He gave off an overwhelming stench and he tottered about as the world spun around him. He circulated the spirit turtle's method of sea suppression at full strength and suppressed his mind. Suddenly he came to a realization. The death demon. The death demon was the most terrifying demon below the Empyrean demon. Normally speaking, the 6th heavenly tribulation should have come across a vexing demon. He had no idea what he had done to actually run into a death demon. Chapter 1572. Li Qingshan's face was swollen and twisted. It was ashen, basically no different from a dead person. His mood was just as ugly as his complexion. The path of great freedom could originally ensure that he would not be disturbed by external demons when he underwent the tribulation. It gave him a great advantage. However, during the fourth heavenly tribulation, the inner demons caused a backlash. His nascent soul directly turned into a demonic infant, wanting to destroy itself. It almost killed him. During the fifth heavenly tribulation, he lost his Yin spirit, so he did not enjoy this benefit. He only defeated the 5 Yin demons after tremendous effort. Finally, during the sixth heavenly tribulation, his soul just fucking rebelled and ran away. Who knew where it was enjoying itself right now? In the end, no matter how he thought about it, he actually did not run away even once. Alas, what a cruel fate. Now that the death demon was possessing him, it devoured his life force furiously. He powered the spirit turtle's method of sea suppression desperately, but he could not find anything to suppress. The death demon had completely merged with him. Death is something that we are born with. An icy cold, sinister voice rang out, but it originated from his head as if it was his inner voice. Wait, have you made a mistake? I'm not a human immortal. Death is the fairest thing in the world. Whether it's a beggar or an emperor, whether it's an ant or a true dragon. He cried out in his heart, but he was immediately interrupted by his inner voice. Captain, don't shoot. We're on the same side. Actually, I'm a demon too. Death is unavoidable. Whether it's an insufferably arrogant cultivator or a celestial blessed with great fortune. Motherfucker. Celestial decay, right? Celestial decay. First, dirty clothes. Second, withered hair. Third, sweating under the armpits. Fourth, smelly body. Fifth, not being happy. As long as an Asura's battle spirit remained, they could not die. Celestials possessed powerful life force and long lifespans. They were almost immortal. However, their battle spirit would eventually tire out. They were not truly immortal. Even Celestials would reach the end of their lives. The 5 signs of decay meant that death was imminent. Human immortals were practically immortal already. They only feared 2 things. One was the book of life and death. The other was the death demon. The former could still be avoided and discussed. The worst-case scenario was to reincarnate and start all over again. The latter, on the other hand, was much more terrifying. The dead demon could neither escape nor be bribed. It didn't matter if you were a divine general of the heavenly palace or a sect leader. Once you died, your soul would be destroyed and you would never be able to reincarnate. If he wanted to become a true immortal, he would have to take this risk. However, for some reason, Li Qingshan did not reach that step at all. Instead, he attracted Death Demon. With his current cultivation, he didn't have any way to fight back. He could only take it head-on with his life. If not for his fiend god bloodline, which granted him an extremely long lifespan, he would have died before being struck by lightning. But if this went on, he wouldn't be able to hold on for too long. Furthermore, under the state of heavenly decay, one's mind was restless and confused. While he was in a daze, a chain-shaped tribulation lightning condensed into a weapon tightly wrapped around him. Before he could react, several lightning bolts flashed and tore him into pieces. With a buzzing sound, countless crisscrossing streaks of lightning slashed back and forth, cutting him into pieces. Not even a complete finger was left behind. With a phoenix cry, Li Qingshan underwent nirvana rebirth in the raging flames. However, to his despair, he discovered that Death Demon was still tightly attached to his body. Even bone maggots weren't enough to describe it. He gritted his teeth and was extremely furious. Scram. The inner voice sounded again. Death is unavoidable. Rebirth is just an illusion. Scram. Another stern shout came from the clouds like a command. In the surging tribulation clouds, the lightning illuminated that person's face. It was Li Qingshan. Death Demon was shocked. Heavenly Demon? Under the tribulation clouds, in the endless lightning, Li Qingshan looked at Li Qingshan. They suddenly looked at each other and smiled. Death Demon said gloomily, "So it's the heavenly demon descendant. If you were the one undergoing tribulation, I would naturally retreat. But he isn't you, so I'm afraid this isn't up to you. Also, if I'm not wrong, you were split from his body. He died here so you can replace him." "No, you're wrong. He is me and I am him. And whether I die or not is not up to you." Li Qingshan descended from the sky. Li Qingshan welcomed him. The two Li Qingshan merged into one. One started a life and death struggle with Death Demon, while the other faced the tribulation lightning that filled the sky. A shooting star suddenly streaked across the sky of the small world. A huge swollen corpse fell from the sky. It was Death Demon. However, Li Qingshan grabbed his throat tightly and punched his face. The speed of his descent suddenly increased. With a loud boom, he smashed onto the ground, shaking the entire world. Death Demon shouted, "You broke the laws of the heavenly tribulation. Master will not forgive you. That is your master and your laws." Li Qingshan stepped on Death Demon and rained down punches. The small world rumbled and countless mountain peaks collapsed. Death Demon struggled and roared. His body swelled and became 10,000 zhang, 1,000,000 zhang, 1,000,000 zhang. Li Qingshan became bigger and bigger until he filled the entire world. The circulation of the miniature world paused. At this exact moment, a lightning hammer condensed from tribulation lightning fell down. Li Qingshan used his innate ability and threw a punch, but the power of tremors on his fist suddenly dispersed. The lightning hammer smashed him into the ocean, shattering him to pieces. In an instant he hit the bottom of the sea. The island foundation of the Xianming cave abode cracked, and scorching lava spewed out from the cracks, creating huge waves. In the surging lava, Li Qingshan had just regained his vision when he saw countless lightning bolts flashing over. His waist tightened and he was tightly bound by the lightning chain again. If he couldn't suppress this Death Demon today, only death awaited him. Death Demon continued to expand, wanting to burst out of the small world. He laughed sinisterly, "Even though you are the descendant of Heavenly Devil, you are still too young. I have a question. Will Death Demon also die? What do you want to do?" Li Qingshan stabbed his hands into Death Demon's chest and drilled in. Death Demon's eyes widened, and Li Qingshan's smile appeared on his face. His body twisted and began to shrink rapidly. When the small world recovered its operation, Li Qingshan roared and broke free of the lightning chain. He spread his wings of wind and flapped them with all his might. He split the sea and swept away the countless tribulation lightning weapons' encirclement. He rushed into the sky and shattered the lightning hammer with one punch. Crimson patterns interweaved, and the tiger's roar shook heaven and earth. Tiger Demon was furious. It was common for one to be angry and fall into the evil path when one was on the decline of the heavens. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Tiger Demon transformation broke through again. In a split second, his blood boiled, and his murderous intent surged like the wind, filling the sky with lightning. In the small world, Death Demon had turned into a warped lump of flesh, struggling and rolling. Sometimes 2 arms would appear and strangle his throat. Sometimes 2 heads would grow and tear at each other. Li Qingshan seemed to have the upper hand, but his lifespan was being continuously devoured by Death Demon, and his primordial spirit was also showing signs of the decline of the heavens. However, he had absolute confidence that he could drag Death Demon to the grave with him. They were entangled together, and the decline of the heavens became indistinguishable. Since death was unavoidable, Death Demon had to die as well. Death Demon felt a wave of terror. He didn't expect this heavenly devil successor to be so crazy, not hesitating to die together. So even Death Demon is afraid of death. Li Qingshan faced death with equanimity and threw himself into the embrace of death together. Death Demon finally couldn't hold on any longer. "Let me go, you win." After destroying the last tribulation lightning weapon, Li Qingshan's broken body fell into the sea. The clouds and wind dispersed, and the sea regained its calm. A ray of multicolored light shot out from the gaps in the clouds, illuminating his smiling face. His primordial spirit was also smiling. Even if Death Demon had taken almost all of his lifespan and he was on the verge of death, it didn't matter. The 9 heavens haven't arrived. The 2 Li Qingshan said together, "I can't die yet." Chapter 1573. Ha 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 ha. Li Qingshan laughed heartily. The sea reverberated and the waves rose again. There was a thunderous boom and light streaked across the horizon. His laughter was still echoing and the waves were still surging, but he was nowhere to be seen. The sun set, the moon rose and the stars twinkled. In the middle of the sky, a star suddenly went out, and a star on the horizon shone a little brighter. The sky-devouring beasts never stopped devouring, and the world of the 5 continents continued to expand. From an insignificant and weak star, it gradually became a bright star. Others might not understand the significance of this. After all, there were countless stars in the sky, and the birth and destruction of the world was just a natural phenomenon. On the peak of the mountains, Luoho Xiaoming looked up alone, as if he had returned to many years ago, when he had shot down the stars with a slingshot. But he was no longer the him of that time, and his eyes were full of nostalgia. That was the place where he had obtained a new life after being burned by karmic fire. Could even be called his hometown. In his eyes there was not much difference between the stars. Destruction did not need any reason. It was just a game. And now, the game had begun again. This time his target was some other unusual stars. G2, the heavens, the gods. Azura only treated the strong as opponents, and attacked those who thought themselves extraordinary. Before that, he had to obtain the qualifications to stand on equal footing with them. Thunder rumbled in the distant sky, and the red sky watched him silently. In the palace that belonged to Nidam, Princess Qin of the Luo clan was awakened by the thunder in the distance. She looked around and the curtains were down. He had disappeared. Her whole body was limp and weak and she curled up her slender white legs. She felt a trace of pain and she could not help but frown. Looking at the patch of red on the jade couch, he sighed. That sigh was heartbreaking and intoxicating, and she was willing to pay anything to smooth out the wrinkles between her brows. I have exposed my identity and betrayed him. I'm afraid he will regard me as his exclusive property, and it will be difficult for me to return to the heavenly law. Even the battle god Nidam did not dare to easily possess her, because once he obtained her, he would not have the heart to kill her. The so-called femme fatale would harm others and herself. Beauty, why are you sighing? Li Qingshan suddenly appeared beside the bed. He lifted the curtain and looked at her. Princess Qin lowered her head and hugged her chest. She curled up and didn't say anything, which made her look even more charming. Li Qingshan licked his lips. Get dressed. I'll take you back to the heavenly axiom. Princess Qin raised her head in surprise. You want to send me back? Do you think I would lie to you? If it were any other day, Li Qingshan might have been reluctant to part with it and asked her to thank him a few more times. However, now that he had just overcome his sixth heavenly tribulation, he was in high spirits and ready to do something big. What femme fatale? Peerless beauty? He didn't care about them at all. Princess Qin's heart relaxed, but she also felt a lot of resentment. She put down her arms, stood up, and elegantly put on her clothes. She looked deeply at him with her clear eyes. You're even more heartless than Nidam. Li Qingshan was thinking about how he could go on a rampage and do whatever he wanted. He was beaming with joy. What? Nothing? Strange woman. Li Qingshan shrugged his shoulders, grabbed her waist and disappeared from the palace. On the vast ocean, Princess Qin immediately said, This is not the heavenly axiom. This is the mortal realm. Although one could reach the heavenly axiom from the Azura path, there were many checkpoints and heavily guarded areas. If they were not careful, they might be attacked by both sides. Although Li Qingshan wasn't afraid, he didn't want to charge through the checkpoints. Of course, it was better to sneak in. The 5 continents were devouring other worlds, so the heaven-climbing vine was needed. Luckily, he was prepared and took a bud for Huan Yaozhu to help him grow. After flying across the ocean, they arrived at the 100-herb garden. Li Fengyuan was still deep in thought under the golden leaf Bodhi tree. Even when Li Qingshan arrived, he didn't seem to notice. Huan Yaozhu was very happy and invited them into the cave. Eldest senior brother, who is this? She's a princess just like you. Qin. Princess Qin said angrily. The heavenly axiom was the princess of the Luo race. How could a princess from a small country be compared to her? From bloodline to status they were completely different. So it's Princess Qin. Huan Yaozhu looked at them and guessed their relationship. Don't mind her. Li Qingshan used his finger to draw a few circles next to his ear, indicating that there was something wrong with this woman's head. I saw it. Princess Qin said angrily. She wasn't someone who easily lost her temper, but this man was just too good at making people angry. Li Qingshan ignored her and patted Huan Yaozhu's shoulder. You don't need to call me eldest senior brother. I won't be eldest senior brother soon. You won't be eldest senior brother? Huan Yaozhu was shocked but felt that it was natural. With his current cultivation, the position of eldest senior brother of the Myriad Forms sect could no longer accommodate him. The Myriad Forms sect was just a springboard for him, and they had only met by chance. He just didn't expect them to part so quickly. However, his heart tightened. Where are you going? Are you going to the desireless heavenly palace above the 9th heaven to be with senior sister Chao? For the vast majority of human immortals, the best way out after transcending the 6th heavenly tribulation was to go above the 9th heaven and become a heavenly official divine general. Then they wouldn't have to worry about the king of hell chasing after them. Of course, they had to use some connections and find some connections. There were very few people like Chao Tianjiao who were immediately taken to the heavenly palace as soon as they succeeded in transcending the tribulation. It was only because she walked the path of true martial that she received the special attention of great Emperor True Martial. As for someone like Li Qingshan who had no connections, all he could do was hope that the Demon Lord would guide him, a junior. However, the Demon Lord had sent Death Demon who had almost killed him. As a result, he could only give up on this thought. Now, the best way was of course to ask Chao Tianjiao to put in a good word for him in front of Emperor True Martial and see if there were any vacancies among the 6 armored divine generals for him to fill. However, after going through so many hardships, how could he be someone's lackey? Why should I be with that mad woman? He wanted to walk up above the 9th heaven in an upright manner and fight his way up, and he didn't want to sneak up and climb up. Aren't the 2 of you Dao companions? Only a ghost would be willing to be Dao companions with that mad woman. Li Qingshan denied flatly. Princess Qin said coldly, "Are there any normal women in your eyes? Of course the one before you is one. Not only is she normal, she's even a good woman." Li Qingshan smiled gently as he gazed at Ruan Yaozhu. During these years in the mortal realm, she'd helped him greatly, and she'd never asked for anything in return. Even if this Princess Bailu didn't have a soul-stealing voice, didn't have an enchanting and charming appearance, and sometimes seemed to be extremely stiff, she was extremely cute in his heart. "Senior brother, you're too kind." Ruan Yaozhu's face blushed, and it grew redder and redder while she spoke in a voice that was like the buzzing of a mosquito. "Then where are you going?" "I'm going on a long journey." Li Qingshan's eyes were bright and full of spirit, and it seemed as if his gaze had penetrated through all obstacles to arrive at the distant future and the unknown new world. Ruan Yaozhu originally wanted to ask when he would return, or if he would return, yet she suddenly understood something and said with relief, "I wish you a pleasant journey. If you have any wishes, then tell me. I'm very strong now." Li Qingshan raised his right arm and displayed his muscles. Ruan Yaozhu smiled lightly. "I'll tell you the next time you come." Li Qingshan was stunned. "All right." Under Ruan Yaozhu's gaze, Li Qingshan left the 100 herb garden with Princess Qin and the heaven-climbing vine. Chapter 1574. Li Qingshan planted the sky-climbing vine on the remnant island of the Xinming cave abode. He casually used the Qilan's ability and the green vines grew rapidly, stretching out tentacles as they climbed up. Plants like ivy and dodder, however, had no support at all and soared straight up into the clouds. The top of the vine reached an extremely high altitude and suddenly pierced into the void, continuing to grow. "You can go now." Li Qingshan clapped his hands as if he had just finished a small task and was dusting off unnecessary dust. Princess Qin, however, did not move and said with a bitter expression, "You said you would send me back." "That's right, the heavenly Tao is above us. Who knows? Maybe it's the hungry ghost realm? Maybe it's the demon realm? And even if it's the heavenly Tao, I'm just a weak girl. Maybe I'll fall into the hands of the bad guys and enter the wolf's den after leaving the tiger's den." As Princess Qin spoke, she was on the verge of tears. "If you can't bear to part with me, just say it." Li Qingshan crossed his arms and curled his lips. No matter what, this girl had the cultivation of 5 heavenly tribulations and could not be considered a weak girl. "I can't bear to part with you." Princess Qin tightly grabbed onto Li Qingshan's arm and looked as if she would cry if he didn't accompany her to the heavenly Tao. "If Lord is really unwilling, I can't force you. If I meet evil demons, I will definitely protect Lord with my life." "Protect your sister? Do we know each other that well?" "Sai so troublesome. I'll send you there." Actually, Li Qingshan was also a bit curious as to what the heavenly Tao looked like. Among the 6 paths of reincarnation, only the heavenly Tao had not been to. With his current cultivation, it wouldn't be a problem for him to enter and take a look. Princess Qin's tears turned into a smile. "Thank you, Lord." Li Qingshan hugged her waist again and they walked into the sky-climbing vine together. They followed the winding path up until they reached the border of the mortal realm. Suddenly, a boundless golden light blossomed in front of them. Flowers fell from the sky and golden lotuses appeared on the ground. The sound of chanting came from the endless light. Even a Kinaro like Princess Qin became absent-minded when she heard it. If one were to look at it from the sea, the sky-climbing vine would be dyed a pure gold color from top to bottom. Then it would shatter inch by inch, scattering golden powder all over the sky. "This light. I think I've seen it somewhere before." In a trance, he saw the goddess Nuwa mending the sky, the Kailan running, the phoenix soaring, the golden auspicious clouds, the Buddha smiling. Break. He gritted his teeth and opened the divine eye on his forehead. All the illusions disappeared. The golden radiance dimmed a lot, but it didn't dissipate. As far as the eye could see, there was a flourishing garden filled with golden leaf Bodhi trees. The ground was paved with golden bricks, and the sun was shining brightly above. Is this the heavenly Tao? Li Qingshan stepped on the gold bricks and looked up at the sky. For some reason he felt a strange sense of familiarity and belonging. At first, he thought that he was the son of destiny of the heavenly Tao, which was why he had such a feeling. After all, he had 3 sacred bloodlines, so it was not strange for him to be favored by heaven's will. But when he thought about it carefully, it seemed that it wasn't just that. Lord, have we arrived? Princess Qin rubbed her eyes and asked in a daze. Were you asking? Li Qingshan said unhappily. He didn't know why he couldn't sense the heaven-climbing vine, which meant that his path of retreat had been cut off. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't feel any threat or hostility, he would almost suspect that this was a trap. I'm confused. Princess Qin smiled apologetically. Her smile was gentle and elegant, and the melancholy on her face suddenly disappeared. The two strolled in the garden. Princess Qin hugged Li Qingshan's arm. At first glance, it seemed like a pair of lovers meeting in the forest. However, Li Qingshan felt that it was more and more unusual. The mysterious feeling was like the growth of plants. He didn't feel any discomfort, but instead felt extremely comfortable, carefree. This was definitely not the 3,000 worlds. A normal world couldn't contain the existence of a Yao god. However, it wasn't like the 6 paths of reincarnation either. The laws of heaven and earth were hidden very deeply, so deeply that it was difficult to see through them. It was as if they were covered by some kind of power, and it was impossible to determine the nature and source of this power. Perhaps this meant that this world was a higher-level world than the human path and Yao beast path. Or perhaps it was a special attribute of the heavenly path like the hell path. Lord, this doesn't seem to be the heavenly path. Princess Qin bit her lips as if she couldn't believe it. Her eyes were filled with inconceivable surprise. Are you sure? This seems to be the Western Paradise. Li Qingshan's body trembled as if he had been struck by lightning. What did you say? It can't be wrong, it can't be wrong. This is the Western Paradise. That was great. Great. Princess Qin was so excited that her body trembled. A breeze blew over and she let go of Li Qingshan's arm. She leaped into the air and actually danced among the Bodhi tree. She let out a bell-like laughter, extremely happy. Li Qingshan was dumbfounded. He stood there in a daze. I've gone to the Western Paradise? How could a normal person go to the Western Paradise just like that? All of a sudden he remembered where he had seen that golden light. It was in the Battle of Black Cloud City. Abbot Yangon had sacrificed himself, and a ray of light had fallen from the sky and taken away his soul. That light seemed to be called the Buddha's light of guidance. Lord, meeting you is Qin's greatest fortune in this life. Princess Qin returned to him and bowed. She was as happy as a little girl. I'm simply too lucky. In the words of Taoism, fortune and misfortune are interdependent, and misfortune turns to fortune. Didn't you want to return to the heavenly path? The heavenly path? How can the heavenly path compare to the Western Paradise? Most celestials believed in Buddhism, and their greatest wish was not to pass the tribulation and become immortals, but to enter the Western Paradise. Buddha said, why is that place named Western Paradise? All living beings in the country have no suffering and can enjoy all kinds of pleasures, hence the name Western Paradise. After entering the Western Paradise, one would be able to completely break away from the 5 impure evil world. They would not suffer from greed, anger, delusion, slowness, and doubt, and they would not fall into the 5 decrepit realms. The Western Paradise was blessed by the Buddha's great compassion wish. There were no demons outside, no worries inside, and one's lifespan was eternal. The word Western Paradise was definitely not a lie. How can you be sure that this is the Western Paradise? Li Qingshan did not believe that there was such a good thing in the world. Princess Qin smiled and said, Lord, listen carefully. Li Qingshan listened carefully. When the wind blew past the golden leaf Bodhi tree, it was not the sound of normal leaves rustling. There was a wondrous rhythm to it, and it had a metallic tinkling sound. There was also the sound of birds singing, which formed a wondrous music that made people feel intoxicated and tranquil. Buddha said, all living beings in this land will chant Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha when they hear this sound. I couldn't help but dance in the sky when I heard this sound. Maybe we just entered a Buddhist holy land by mistake. Li Qingshan continued to refute, and he was more inclined to believe that he had fallen into a trap. Princess Qin faintly smiled and tapped his chest with her slender finger. I originally had a lot of resentment towards you. I blamed you for taking my chastity, but I also blamed you for not being kind to the fairer sex. However, I was grateful to you for saving my life, so I couldn't help but want to rely on you and make you my Tao companion. That's why I lured you to the heavenly law, hoping that you would change your mind. I was really worried. However, after coming to this Western paradise, I suddenly felt relieved. There was no resentment or hatred in my heart. Instead, I was filled with gratitude. I felt that this was a fortuitous encounter bestowed by the heavens. Why should I let fate take its course? Why worry about personal feelings? I don't hope to be together with Lord, I just hope that Lord is well. If it wasn't the Western paradise, what other place could be so wondrous? Li Qingshan squinted his eyes and looked over. Princess Qin's words were filled with sincerity. There was no falsehood at all. He should have felt apologetic and moved, but instead he felt a chill in his heart. He couldn't help but look at himself and found that the ox demon, tiger demon, ape demon, and other demonic thoughts were weakening. Letting go of his obsession, forgetting his anger and no longer being obsessed, was this a good thing? It had to be said that it made him feel very happy and comfortable. He had never felt so relaxed in his life. However, it also made him feel an indescribable fear. With his Yao God cultivation and his identity as the descendant of the demonic god, this world was actually able to silently affect his thoughts. Other than the legendary Western paradise, where else could it be? In the face of the Buddha's great compassion wish, what was the faith of a little demon god? Li Qingshan said decisively, "No, I can't stay here." What? Princess Qin was extremely shocked and almost wanted to ask, "Are you stupid? I promised to send you back to the heavenly law, but this isn't the heavenly law. Also, don't forget that we snuck in here. Maybe someone will come and chase us away immediately. They might even say that they don't want to kill us. Lord, you promised me a goat carriage and a deer carriage, but now you gave me a white ox carriage. I can't be happier. Not to mention me, even Buddha won't blame you. You might as well say that Buddha did it. You're looking down on this Western paradise too much, using the heavenly law as a comparison. The celestials are arrogant, reserved, and stingy. Buddha is merciful and boundless, so why would anyone chase us away or even kill us? Those who aren't fated will go through thousands of twists and turns. Those who are fated will ascend to the Western paradise. If you're here, then you're here. If you're fated, then you're fated." Princess Qin smiled and sighed. She shook her head with an expression of being enlightened. Her words were filled with the meaning of Zen. She had already drawn a clear line between herself and the lowly celestials. Li Qingshan felt his balls ache. This could be considered as being illuminated by the lighthouse of democracy and freedom, so he still ran in. His biggest worry right now was whether there was some kind of conspiracy here. He was afraid that Buddha would suddenly appear and slap him to death with Buddha's palm. Princess Qin, why do you think we're being guided here? Is it because your piety moved Buddha? Of course not. I've always done nothing, so how can I be guided by Buddha's light? Sir, do you have a vocation? Writing novels? He remembered that he was a disciple of a novel school. Writing novels was his vocation. No, I'm talking about a position in the heavenly palace. I've just passed the 6th heavenly tribulation not long ago. I don't have any connections, so how can I have a position? That's right. I think you've been chosen as the celestial general of Sangha. Li Qingshan had heard of this term before. The so-called divine general of Sangharama was the divine protector general of Buddhism. It was another path, another system outside of the heavenly palace. It was the path that monks walked. He remembered that Mahasvara was also one of the heavens, so it could also belong to Buddhism. Celestial demons were also gods and Buddhas. And a long, long time ago he was a layman disciple of Buddhism. Damn, this really was chanting Buddha, chanting Dharma, chanting Sangha. Sir, you're fated with Buddha. Thus, he remembered that all the monks he had met in his life seemed to have said the same thing. He had always treated these words as a joke. Even if Abbot Yangon came to persuade him, his will couldn't be shaken. Never would he have thought that his words would come true. He accidentally entered the pure land of bliss and became the celestial general of Sangha. What an ill-fated fate. Chapter 1575. However, Li Qingshan also heaved a sigh of relief. Since he had become a divine general, there probably wouldn't be a palm technique that could descend from the sky. Right now, it was better to think about how to get out of this ghastly place. The scenery of this resplendent garden paved with golden bricks was indeed extremely beautiful, but there was not a single soul in sight. There was only a magic altar and a few fine houses. Although it couldn't be considered a ruin, there was an indescribable desolation that made people feel lonely. He glanced at Princess Qin. She seemed to be completely unaware and had a silly smile on her face. Hearing that he was leaving, she was reluctant to part. I fulfilled my promise. If you want to stay, then stay. Li Qingshan waved his hand and left. The moment he stepped out of the garden, a sandstorm suddenly blew over and he almost couldn't open his eyes. After the sandstorm passed, he suddenly looked back. The Bodhi tree and the spell altar were gone. The garden had disappeared without a trace, leaving only a field of white sand. Princess Qin stood there in a daze. The smile on her face hadn't even faded yet. What did you do? As Li Qingshan was thinking, a golden light flew over from the horizon and landed in front of him. It was a golden leaf. The golden leaf flickered and a dignified and kind voice came out. You must be the new divine General Sangha. That's right. Follow me. The golden leaf flew over and Li Qingshan followed closely behind. In an instant they arrived at a dazzling hall. On the shining golden plaque were written the words, Sangha Shrine. The golden leaf floated in and landed in a plump palm. Li Qingshan looked up and saw a dignified and easygoing middle-aged man. The aura he emitted told him that this was a true god. I am the god Sangha. Li Qingshan didn't dare to be careless. He cupped his hands and said, I am Li Qingshan. Greetings, goddess. The god Sangha put his palms together and returned the greeting with a smile. You are not a Buddhist disciple. Li Qingshan immediately put his palms together and said, Lay disciple, lay disciple. He thought for a moment and decided not to hide anything. I practice the Tao of great freedom. He had thought that the Sangharama deity would look down on him, the descendant of the heavenly demon who had been smeared with dirt. It would be best if it got angry and chased him out of this pure land. However, the Sangharama deity's smile did not change and it did not seem to care at all. Li Qingshan could only ask, what does Divine General Kalin need to do? He must be a character like the double flower red rod, who went around slaying demons and devils, shouting, I will destroy you on behalf of Buddha. He could seize the opportunity to slip away. However, the Sangharama deity disappointed him again. Don't be impatient. You have just arrived at the pure land of ultimate bliss. You can take a look around first. Li Qingshan made up his mind. May I ask how I can get out of here? Get out? The Sangharama deity was also surprised. Most people who came to this pure land of ultimate bliss would be overjoyed and grateful. There had never been anyone who was in a hurry to leave. To tell you the truth, I once swore the Nether River blood oath. Li Qingshan did not hide anything and told it everything about his bet with demon god Qiongqi. Now that the time of the bet is approaching, I need to hurry to the demon domain and fight to the death with that demon god. When he reached the end of his sentence, his face was full of heroism. He had the aura of, the wind is howling, the water is cold, the hero will never return. Qingqi Mountain was Qiongqi's base camp. It had a great geographical advantage and was a true god himself. Even with the mountain shifting token, he might not be able to topple Qingqi Mountain easily. However, he was now a member of an organization. There were so many mighty figures in the Buddhist sections. They would not want a new follower like him to die for nothing. If the Sangharama deity was willing to lend a hand and summon a few Vajra Arhats, he would be able to watch Qingqi Mountain fall. As the spirit tortoise transformation matured, my wisdom is really increasing day by day. I see. No wonder you were chosen as the Sangharama deity general. At such a young age, you dare to fight against a demon god. Impressive, impressive. The Sangharama deity patted Li Qingshan's shoulder in admiration. However, you don't have to worry. As long as you stay in this pure land of ultimate bliss, even if the 12 demon gods work together, they won't be able to do anything to you. But I heard that the Nether River blood oath is very powerful, the Sangharama deity said proudly. Don't forget where you are. How can a mere oath compare to the Buddha's great compassion wish? Just stay here peacefully. Wait, this is different from what I planned. Li Qingshan finally understood what a large organization was. Although Qiongqi was terrifying, he was on the same level as the Sangharama deity. They were both true gods. In the Buddhist sects, there were countless mighty figures of this level. There were at least 17 or 18 arhats, and above them were the 4 great bodhisattvas. Above them were the Buddhas. What Nether River blood oath? In front of our leader, Brother Rulai, it was like a fart. If you don't like it, come, stick your head over here and let Brother Rulai explain it to you. Li Qingshan said with grief and indignation. Are we just going to let that Qiongqi continue to be arrogant? Good will be rewarded and evil will be punished. When he is filled with evil, he won't be able to escape this calamity. Qingshan, you are violating the precepts of anger. He immediately put his palms together and recited a poem. With a thought of anger, the forest of merits will be set on fire. With a thought of anger, the doors of millions of obstacles will be opened. In the end, the Sangarama deity did not tell him how to leave this pure land of ultimate bliss. Perhaps it saw through his plan to kill with a borrowed knife, or perhaps it was worried that he would run over and fight Qiongqi. Li Qingshan could not force a true god. After some calculations, he realized that he still had a year and a half, so he had to think of a way himself. Thus, he soared into the sky, chose a direction, and flew through the air. In just half a day he gave up. This pure land of ultimate bliss was very similar to the ultimate ruins. Not only was it boundless, but it was also outside of the 6 paths of reincarnation. There was no so-called boundary or exit. Moreover, it was also constantly affecting his mind. Peaceful and joyful feelings gushed out from the bottom of his heart endlessly like a spring. Like sunlight melting snow, it erased the ox demon's obsession. Like removing firewood from the bottom of a cauldron, it pacified the tiger demon's fury. Like clear sunlight, it diluted the ape demon's obsession. Rather than calling this a feeling of joy, it was more like relief. He had let go of the heavy burden he had always shouldered. He even recalled the beauty of his childhood, the picturesque scenery of Crouching Ox Village, and the simplicity and purity of the villagers. His elder brother and sister-in-law had also shown a gentle side in the past, but it was not just bullying and humiliation. He gritted his teeth and shook his head violently, wanting to chase these thoughts away. However, even though he was the successor of the Empyrean demon, he was actually unable to do anything about it. These thoughts did not originate from the outside world. Instead, they originated from the bottom of his heart. Otherwise, why would he challenge the Black Wind stronghold? Why would he leave the money to his elder brother and sister-in-law? Why would he want to release Brother Ox? These were all the beauty and emotions in his heart. However, if this continued, all of the demon transformations would regress, or in other words, they had already begun to regress. Even the foundations of the 9 transformations of the demonic and divine would cease to exist. Everyone possesses a Buddhist nature in their hearts. All beings can become Buddhas, the holy azure deity murmured. He could tell that Li Qingshan was hiding many things and had many selfish motives, but he did not take it to heart. Many people who had just arrived in Pure Land of ultimate bliss were like that. But in the end they would be purified by this pure land and become brand new. Even the world of freedom had to lower its head before the Buddha, so what was a mere successor of the Empyrean demon? Chapter 1576. Li Qingshan clutched his head with both hands, his brows furrowed. His body arched and his spine stood tall, like a struggling ox. A strange smile hung at the corner of his mouth. The various demonic transformations began to recede. Ox demon strength sinks in the mud. If all mud no longer existed, what was the point of clinging to it? If one could enjoy it, who would be willing to suffer? This was bliss, a pure land without pain. He roared at the sky, the wind and clouds surging. He bared his fangs and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. His mind calmed down in an instant. He had already made up his mind. Phoenix's nirvana. The bright red flames spread and engulfed everything, but that was not enough. As long as the beautiful and moving memories remained, he could not resist this bliss. He could not give it up, nor was he willing to give it up. Memories were one. How could they be clearly distinguished between beauty and ugliness, moving emotions and pain? How could he not know that little and had killed countless people and committed heinous crimes? But in his eyes, there was no difference between beauty and bones. They were both as little Anne. How should he separate these memories? With a long sigh, he activated the spirit turtle transformation. His eyes suddenly became blank as if all his thoughts had been emptied. His reflection of the clear blue sky was also burned by the raging fire falling from the sky. Boom! A streak of light flew past, landing in a field. An old couple hurried over. Smoke and fire lingered in the air, and sparks flew in their faces. They could not immediately approach. But they did not seem to know fear. The old man picked up his tools and opened up a path. At this time, the cry of a baby suddenly rang out in front. This situation was rather strange. The old couple looked at each other, burning with anxiety. They quickened their pace. They hurried through the burnt sorghum and the old man missed. The old woman reacted quickly and grabbed his arm, preventing him from falling into the scorched pit. The flames in the sinkhole had not been completely extinguished. In the middle of the sinkhole was half a broken eggshell, and there was a baby lying inside. His body was wrinkled and pink. He clenched his fists and kicked his legs, as if he was fighting with an invisible monster. He was crying loudly. The old man slowly slid down the sinkhole, extinguished the remaining fire, and approached the baby. The baby suddenly opened his eyes and stopped crying. A pair of big red eyes clearly reflected the surrounding scenery. The old man stopped in his tracks, not daring to approach. The old woman walked past him and picked up the baby. Her face was full of excitement. "Old man, look, it's a baby. It's a gift from His Majesty." Before they came to this nirvana, they ate vegetarian, prayed to the Buddha, and did good deeds all their lives. However, they didn't have any children. They were the typical local example of good people don't get rewarded. They didn't have any regrets. They were pious and did good deeds as usual. After they died, they were led to this nirvana. However, they didn't stop thinking about it. Today their dream finally came true. When the old man heard this, he no longer hesitated. He immediately knelt down and chanted the name of Buddha. They carried the child back to the house and fed him rice porridge. The child did not refuse and ate more than an adult. The old woman beamed with joy. "Oh, luckily we are in His Majesty's territory. Otherwise we would all be poor because of him." The old man slapped his thigh. "All right, I'll go and plant more pumpkins. We can harvest them in a few days and feed the kid pumpkin soup." The Pure Land of Ultimate Bliss had the saying, "Flowers that don't wither in all 4 seasons and the scenery of spring in all 8 seasons." The climate was warm and comfortable, and there was no severe cold or heat. The land was exceptionally fertile, and there was no need for labor. Farming was no longer a hard job of facing the yellow soil with one's back to the sky. It had become a great joy. They could plant whatever they wanted to eat. Today it was planted and the next day it would sprout. It was different every day. Soon it would blossom and bear fruit. It was an indescribable joy. The fields were always filled with the fragrance of flowers. The child was growing up day by day. Yes, the child was growing up every day, every moment. The next day he could run all over the place and eat more and more. A few days later, the newly planted pumpkin patch could no longer satisfy his appetite. The old couple did not find it strange. Presumably, in this nirvana, children grew as fast as melons and fruits. One day the child was eating melons. Suddenly, a light flashed through his mind. He looked up from the melon skin. "Who am I?" This caught the old couple off guard. These days they had discussed the naming of the child. For the child given by His Majesty, the name must be careful and meaningful. They could not just call him Ergu or Daju. However, they were not educated. The children in the village in the previous generation all had such names. The old man smoked 3 packs of tobacco but still could not find a name. He exhaled a mouthful of smoke. "Hey, old woman, why didn't His Majesty give him a name as well?" The old woman pointed at the old man's head and said resentfully, "You old thing, you really think you have too little gold? I can't count on you. I'll go to the temple and ask for one in a few days." However, after a few days the child asked himself. The old couple looked at each other and were speechless. "Who am I?" The child threw away the melon skin. His voice became louder. "I got it." The old man slapped his thigh again. "You were born from an egg. Let's call you Egg Shing." The old woman glared at the old man. The old man did not feel it at all. He said proudly, "My surname is Ruan. You will be called Ruan Egg Shing." The old woman snatched the tobacco pipe and hit him on the head. "You are the soft egg. You are the soft egg." The old man parried and said, "I am not a soft egg. How can I be hit by you?" The child muttered to himself, "Egg Shing? My name is Egg Shing." He automatically ignored the word Ruan. Suddenly he smiled and jumped up. "I am Egg Shing. I still want to eat melons. The melons are all gone. Go and plant them." The old man picked up the melon seeds on the ground and carried the hoe. He walked out of the door dejectedly. Egg Shing followed behind him, waiting to eat melons. The old man laughed. "Egg Shing, don't be anxious. It won't grow in 10 days to half a month." Egg Shing did not give up and continued to follow. The old man patted his head and went to the field to plant the melon seeds. Egg Shing squatted on the ridge of the field and waited. His eyes were fixed on the melon field. What a silly child. The old man smiled and shook his head. Suddenly he heard Egg Shing mumble, "Grow, grow, grow." A pair of scarlet eyes gradually turned green. They were as clear as water and as green as leaves. The melon sprouts broke out of the soil and grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. Bright yellow flowers bloomed and round fruits grew under the petals. They swelled up like balloons. In the next moment, the melon was ripe and fell. Eggshing rushed into the melon field and picked up a watermelon that was bigger than his head. He smashed it with his head and started eating. Chapter 1577. The watermelon was extremely sweet. Perhaps because it was born in this paradise, the juice was filled with joy. Egg could not help but chuckle as he ate. It was as if he had never felt so relaxed and joyful in his life. Suddenly he felt his face warm and wet. He wiped it and licked it, but it was salty and bitter. What is this? He blinked his eyes. His green eyes were like the mouth of a spring. The salty and bitter liquid on his face increased, unable to be stopped. Perhaps because he was not born in this paradise and was soaked in pain, he could only produce this bitter liquid. His chest felt heavy as if something was on the verge of bursting out. His small face scrunched up as he let out a low growl that seemed human yet inhuman. Rings of green light surged out. The plants grew madly, tangling with each other and killing each other. He was like an ostrich, burying his head into the melon skin. After a long time it finally calmed down. The plants had all withered. He raised his head slowly, revealing an innocent smile again. His green eyes were no longer scarlet. The old couple were shocked, unsure of what had happened. The man called Li Qingshan had used the phoenix's nerva, when he was at his weakest, to seal everything with the spirit turtle, preventing his cultivation from regressing. He was like a turtle withdrawing its head into its shell to avoid the invasion of the outside world. However, he knew very well that this was only a temporary measure. The spirit turtle was good at defending, but not only was this fragile defense being corroded by the paradise, it was also being questioned by himself. He would eventually ask, "Who am I?" And just now, the Qilin transformation, that had stagnated for so long, had actually advanced a level without him realizing it. Perhaps this world was suitable for the cultivation of the Qilin transformation, or perhaps he had unintentionally agreed with the principle of letting nature take its course. Anyway, his cultivation did not decline, but instead increased, tearing a crack in the fragile turtle shell. Those memories filled with blood, slaughter, pain, and despair, even if it was just a sliver, were already not something the current egg could endure. Compared to the ease and joy he felt right now, the words beyond the 9 heavens were far too heavy and vague. The sealed memories would eventually recover. At that time, would he still be willing to endure the pain? In the blink of an eye, Eggshing was already 1 month old. The old couple invited all the families within a radius of 10 miles and held a banquet in a wheat field. Of course, the pure land of ultimate bliss abided by all the Buddhist precepts. Alcohol, meat, and fish were not to be touched. What they drank was only tea and fruit juice. However, as the saying goes, it's not the tea that intoxicates you, but the tea that intoxicates you. Amidst the rich fragrance of the flowers, under the warm blazing sun, everyone's faces were suffused with a red glow, and their laughter did not stop for a single moment. In the middle of the threshing field was a square table with a rattan chair on it. The main character of this gathering, Eggshing, was sitting high on the rattan chair to ensure that everyone could see him. He looked to be about 8 or 9 years old. He wore a tiger head hat and tiger head shoes, and a silver safety lock hung around his neck. However, he was the only one who wasn't smiling. His eyes were half closed and he was dozing off. The cracks continued to expand, and the memories of the past continuously seeped in, turning into nightmares. Sometimes he would dream of being forced to work, being exposed to the scorching sun, his whole body aching. Sometimes he would dream of carrying a corpse and climbing an iceberg with difficulty. The most terrifying were those dreams where he was being hunted. The enemies were all different. There was an ugly and malicious old woman, a cold and confident swordsman, and a ferocious black dragon. Every time he was forced into a desperate situation, he would wake up from the nightmare. Thus, he tried his best to stay awake, and only took a short nap when he couldn't take it anymore. Fortunately, when he was awake he was still relatively happy, and he also liked this kind of liveliness. The threshing field was full of joy. Even though he could be seen just by raising his head, he was still surrounded by people. There were 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside, and all of them were clicking their tongues in wonder. Among the various Buddhist precepts, the prohibition of lust was far more serious than the prohibition of alcohol. However, eating, drinking, and sex are the great desires of man, and it was very difficult to overcome. But in this pure land of ultimate bliss, it was not a problem at all. Everyone had no desire for lust, even husband and wife could not do it, so it was rare for newborns to be born. If it was in an ordinary world, to grow this big in a month, one would probably be treated as a monster. But in this pure land of ultimate bliss no one thought so. Everyone's heart was filled with kindness, and they were sincerely happy for the old couple. They looked at Egshing as if they were looking at their own children. Egshing was infected by this atmosphere and he could not help but smile. Egshing, show them what you've got. Old man Ruan shouted. Okay. Egshing responded and jumped up, somersaulted and firmly stepped on the back of the chair. He put on a posture of golden rooster standing on one leg, and shouted, grow, grow, grow. Clusters of wheat sprouts broke through the soil, and in the blink of an eye, the threshing field became a golden wheat field. Amidst the exclamations someone said, it's amazing. As expected of the child bestowed by Buddha. Brother Ruan, you should go to the temple to fulfill your vows. Old man Ruan touched his head. I haven't had the time. There's no time like the present. Let's go now. Everyone, let's go together. The crowd cheered loudly, lifted the table as if carrying a palanquin, and walked majestically to the temple. This side of the world was full of temples. In less than 2 hours, they arrived in front of a solemn, simple and ancient temple. The reception monk welcomed them into the temple and invited the abbot. Everyone talked at once, and the abbot was also surprised and a little suspicious. Unlike these ordinary people, who only knew how to recite Buddhist scriptures, he was a serious Buddhist. Even Guanyin sending children was a common saying, let alone Buddha sending children. Therefore he used heavenly eye to take a closer look at Egshing, and could not help but be surprised. He quickly lifted his kasaya and bowed deeply to Egshing. Amitba, I didn't know it was Divine General Jialan. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you. What he saw was no longer a child but a golden, tall and majestic god. No matter how suitable the pure land of ultimate bliss was for Buddhists to cultivate, it was still rare for one to survive 6 heavenly tribulations. Divine General Jialan was already a righteous Buddhist god. Although his official position was not high, he had entered the ranks of gods and could be worshipped by believers. Even if he was reborn and his memories were sealed, his godhood would still exist. In the pure land of ultimate bliss, monks had an extremely high status. Hearing that it was Divine General Jialan, everyone hurriedly bowed down. Even the old couple did not dare to not bow. Egshing jumped into the crowd and helped them up. He widened his eyes and questioned the abbot. You baldy, why are you talking about blue and green? Get up, don't bow to me. The abbot was shocked. Could it be that this divine general was unwilling to reveal his identity? At this moment, a magnificent voice came from outside the temple. Amitba. Long time no see, General Li. A monk holding a monk's staff, wearing a bamboo hat, and an old kasaya walked into the temple. Egshing felt inexplicably anxious. Who are you? You also call me a general? What General Li? Why not General Watermelon? Chapter 1578. The abbot had just gotten up and glanced outside the temple gate. He almost fell to the ground again. Amitba, what's going on today? Another one is here. It turned out that the monk who called himself Rangoon outside the gate looked inconspicuous, but under the observation of the heavenly eye, he was clearly a divine monk who had attained anagami, and was only one step away from arhat. In terms of status in Buddhism, he was even higher than the divine General Sangha. Even in this pure land of ultimate bliss, it was very rare. General, you're really forgetful. You've forgotten about me so quickly. Abbot Rangoon slightly lifted his bamboo hat, revealing a young and handsome face. Even if Li Qingshan's memory wasn't sealed, he might not recognize him. In the Battle of Black Cloud City, he sacrificed himself to attract the light of guidance, severely injuring the incarnation of the demon god, and winning precious time for Li Qingshan. And he was originally an eminent monk of the Pure Land school, so this pure land of ultimate bliss was the most suitable place for cultivation. He had successfully rebuilt his golden body, and his cultivation had reached the next level. He had already gone through 6 heavenly tribulations. I'm not a general and I don't know you. Egg put his hands on his waist, puffed out his chest and said arrogantly. But in his heart he was panicking. This monk was really familiar. He had probably seen him in one of his nightmares. That was almost one of his worst dreams. He fought on a bloody battlefield and countless people died tragically. The enemy was so strong that it made people despair. He originally thought that as long as he stayed awake, he could stay away from those nightmares. You don't know me, but I know you. Stinky monk. Damn bald donkey. Go away, I don't want to see you. Egg waved his hand angrily, and huge trees rose from the ground, isolating Abbot Rangoon outside the gate. Everyone was shocked. This was the pure land of ultimate bliss of Amitabha. This was simply scolding a bald person in front of a monk. You don't want to see me, but I have to see you. Abbot Rangoon didn't need to use the heavenly eye to see that the tall and mighty divine General Sangha looked exactly like Li Qingshan. He walked into the temple and all the huge trees automatically parted to make a path for him. Step by step, he walked in front of Egshing and observed his expression. He vaguely guessed that there was something wrong with his memory. Egshing clenched his teeth and stared at Yangon like an enraged little beast. He had never met such a powerful person in his life, except in his nightmares. It was a nightmare that had come true. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, Abbot Yangon suddenly bowed deeply. I have an important request. In the entire Elysium, there was probably only one person who could do this. This was related to the White Bone Bodhisattva, and even more related to the path and future of the entire Pure Land sect. He had always been brooding over it. Not only could his cultivation not improve, but it also gradually regressed. It wasn't until he arrived at the Pure Land of ultimate bliss that he felt slightly relieved. After attaining the Anagami fruit, he couldn't help but start searching for the answer. How did that person degenerate into a white bone bodhisattva? Egshing was taken aback. This was not the same as his usual nightmare. Get up. Are you so sure that I'm that general? Abbot Yangon raised his head and looked past Egg into the magnificent and majestic Mahavira Hall. Amidst the green smoke, the golden Buddha's eyes were half closed, and the corners of his lips were slightly raised as if he was smiling. Namo Amitabha, if I'm looking for a secret that I shouldn't know, please use your divine light to stop me. He held his breath as if waiting for the judgment to come, but nothing happened. So he said, follow me, you'll know at a glance. The layout of this temple was very large. It had everything such as the Heavenly King Hall and the Arhat Hall, worshipping all kinds of gods and Buddhas. And as the guardian deity of the monastery, the Sangharama Hall naturally couldn't be lacking. Although it was only a side hall, the courtyard was majestic, solemn, and spotless. Other than the Sangharama god sitting in the center, there were dozens of Sangharama gods lined up on both sides. Each of them was lifelike and majestic. At the very end there was a brand new statue. It had red hair and red eyes. It held its head high and was in high spirits. The nameplate beside it was engraved with 3 big words, Li Qingshan. Now in the entire Elysium, there was such a statue in all the temples that worshipped the Sangharama god. That was why Abbot Yangon knew of his arrival and specially came to find him. Li Qingshan, Li Qingshan. Egshing looked at the statue in a daze. The cracks on the seal expanded rapidly. Countless memory fragments flashed. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he couldn't deny that it was him. He had seen this face many times in his nightmares, in the shadows of swords and sabers, and in the eyes of his enemies that were filled with killing intent. However, unlike him, that man seemed to be fearless. That was exactly what he wanted to be. Egshing suddenly looked back. If I was Li Qingshan, what do you want me to do? It's not convenient to talk about it here. You have to follow me to a place. You will know when the time comes. Egshing almost agreed immediately. He had a feeling that as long as he followed this monk, he could become Li Qingshan and completely get rid of those damn nightmares. He opened his mouth to speak, but suddenly saw the old couple outside the Sangharama temple. They were looking at him eagerly, hesitating and not daring to enter. Thus, he lowered his head and no longer looked at the statue. I can't go with you. I want to go home. He clearly remembered that every time he woke up from a nightmare, they would always accompany him. There was no exception. Abbot Yangon was a little surprised and fell into deep thought. The night was dark and the bright moon hung high in the sky. In the melon field, Egshing sat on a big watermelon the size of a calf. He stared at the bright moon without the slightest hint of tiredness. He repeatedly recalled the experience during the day, especially the statue of Li Qingshan. Is that my original appearance? At this moment he heard a rustling sound. The old couple walked along the ridge of the field one after the other. He waved his hand impatiently. Grandpa, Grandma, I'm going to sleep now. Don't keep rushing me. The old couple looked at each other. Kid, you go. Egshing was shocked. Where am I going? To find that master. Sai, seeing you have nightmares every night, we feel terrible. I thought you were possessed and even begged Buddha to protect you. I didn't expect you to be one of Buddha's generals. Buddha probably doesn't want to see you slacking off and not working. We begged Buddha, but we might end up harming you instead. Sai, Buddha has so many generals. Why can't he let you go? The old couple nagged. Egshing felt a surge of warmth in his chest. He pursed his lips but couldn't say a word. He jumped down from the big watermelon, bowed deeply to them and ran away with large strides. The moonlight was as bright as day, elongating his shadow. Abbot Yangon stood alone in front of the temple, waiting. He looked a little compassionate. Wasn't this the paradise he had always yearned for? What else was there to ask? Chapter 1579. At this moment, Abbot Yangon saw a small figure dashing towards him from the grassy plain under the silvery moonlight. He murmured, "What are you asking again?" Egshing stood still in front of the temple gate and took a deep breath with his hands on his knees. He said resolutely, "Let's go." If his life was fated to be filled with nightmares, then he would continue fighting like Li Qingshan. He would not hide away like a coward, too afraid to sleep. Wait. Egshing barged into the temple again, and the monks exclaimed in surprise. He then walked out while clapping his hands in satisfaction. In the Sangharama hall, the divine general called Li Qingshan, who sat at the very end, had been smashed to a pulp. He no longer possessed his awe-inspiring bearing. Why? Abbot Yangon was also surprised. Becoming a god and being worshipped was probably something all cultivators hoped for. Was it because his position was too low? I don't want anyone to worship me. Amitabha, do you only want to be equal to all living beings? I am ashamed. Abbot Yangon put his palms together and sighed with a smile, but only you can do this. What is it? Don't worry, we will talk as we go. Then they walked into the silvery blue night and disappeared into the vast plain. In the messy Sangharama temple, all the monks felt weak all over. In the pure land of ultimate bliss, not to mention the statues worshipped in the temples, no one even dared to damage a piece of paper with a painting of a god on it. They had never heard of such a horrifying and rebellious thing, and they did not know what to do. In the tall and deep divine hall, the Sangharama god and a group of divine generals seemed to be staring at them. The monks knelt on the ground and kowtowed repeatedly, confessing their sins. The abbot was the calmest. He ordered, "Quickly clean up this place, then go to Master Zhu's carpenter shop and hire another one. No one is allowed to leak anything about this." He went to the corner and held up the remaining half of the head of the divine general Li Qingshan. With his buttocks facing the sky, he bowed deeply. "I have failed to protect you well. Please forgive me. I will rebuild your Dharmakaya as soon as possible." The next morning, the Sangharama temple was swept clean again. A brand new statue stood high on the altar. The bright and beautiful sunlight fell on him, making him look even more spirited. From time to time, the monks would come over to take a look and pay their respects to confirm the existence of this statue. What happened last night was like a nightmare. At the same time, Egsun felt that Abbot Yangon had no ill intentions, so he told him about his encounter. "You have indeed lost your memories. Did I hit my head?" Eggboy touched his head with both hands, but he didn't find even a big bump. "Haha, of course not." Abbot Yangon could vaguely guess that Li Qingshan had deliberately sealed his memories to resist the influence of the pure land of ultimate bliss. Based on his understanding of this kid, he was absolutely capable of doing such a thing. "Then how do I recover?" "Well, that's easy." Abbot Yangon smiled. His young and handsome face had a hint of ill intentions. He even patted Egsun's shoulder. "No need to thank me. I asked you to do something, so you should repay me." Thus, he turned around and slightly deviated from the direction. He passed through a dense forest where there were no wild beasts. He crossed a large river where there were no fish. He climbed up a large mountain where there were only bird cries that never stopped. It was a wonderful melody that seemed to be singing the praises of this wonderful world. Sometimes flocks of birds would fly, gather and disperse, and the sound of flapping wings would resound through the sky. It was like a paradise for birds, and they couldn't help but stop to admire it. Climbing to the peak of the mountain and looking down at the entire plain, Egsun's eyes were wide open. He saw countless buildings at the foot of the mountain. There were houses, towers, canals, palaces, fountains, temples and plazas. It stretched to the end of the horizon, and it was unknown how many hundreds of miles it was. Even in his previous life he had never seen such a big city. The clear river flowed down from the mountain, passing through the entire city and spreading to every corner through the canals. They followed the river, and the city was also filled with the sounds of birds and the fragrance of flowers. There were people coming and going everywhere, but they weren't idle. Similarly, there were peddlers and craftsmen who sold their wares. However, there was no worry on their faces. The peddlers weren't worried that their goods wouldn't be sold or that they wouldn't be able to get a good price. They didn't have any schemes and they enthusiastically shared their goods with the passers-by. Their peddling was more like a singing competition among birds, and it became a street scene. The craftsmen were fully focused on their own work, but they didn't live on it. Instead, they lived on a passion that came from the bottom of their hearts. Any one of them would be an extraordinary master in the mortal world. And the handicrafts that came from their hands were all exquisite and peerless. In the ordinary world they would definitely be priceless. Now they were only placed by the roadside for passers-by to judge and choose. And the things used for trading were not gold, silver, copper and iron but Bodhi seeds. In this world, Bodhi trees were everywhere and Bodhi seeds were not valuable. However, no one had any greedy or evil thoughts in their hearts. Bodhi seeds were just a kind of token, and everyone did their job and took what they needed. If you asked them to do nothing, they would feel that it was meaningless. Along the way, Egg Shing's mouth was not empty, and he carried a lot of food and drink in his arms. Although he didn't have half a Bodhi seed in his hands, with Abbot Yangon beside him, the bystanders thought that he was a young monk who followed their master to travel, and they fought to stuff things into his arms. This place is really... He gulped and swallowed everything in his mouth. A good place. The chef's skills were simply excellent. There were crystal-clear sweet potato glutinous rice and black sesame pancakes, burnt yellow 1000-page tofu, sweet and fragrant corn soup, and there were countless of them. Up until now there hadn't been a repeat, and it simply made his appetite increase. My Buddha is merciful and all living beings suffer. It would be great if the boundless world could be like this. Abbot Yangon sighed from the bottom of his heart, and he had infinite yearning. When that time comes there won't be anything left for you. Monks can all renounce asceticism and go home. Abbot Yangon said, when that time comes there won't be a need for monks and perhaps even Buddha won't be needed. Egg Shing was stunned for a moment, and in this moment of distraction, an old lady raised her head and puffed out her chest, and walked towards him as if she was flying. She didn't notice him and they suddenly collided. Although he was small in stature, his strength was great and he didn't even sway. The old lady cried out in pain and fell heavily to the ground. He hurriedly went to help the old lady, but she suddenly grabbed his wrist tightly. He panicked in his heart and he didn't know why he was panicking, but he had a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The old lady said, "Child, are you all right?" She touched him from head to toe. "Grandma didn't injure you, right?" No. Amit Ba, Buddha bless me, it's good that you're all right, it's good that you're all right. The old lady got up and stuffed a handful of Bodhi seeds into his hands. Take it and buy some candy. She then walked away as if she was flying. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.